This season of Give Up After 3 is brought to you by the book of the same name, Give Up After 3, a historical analysis of Sherlock's lost final episode, where I take all of the research we've done from the show across the seasons and all of the learnings and findings and condense that into a full academic book. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but it also has a lot of the more interesting things we discovered and worked through. So if you want a way to support the show and also get something really interesting, you can find that at zeroindent.com/store. That's zeroindent.com/. Okay. So Darth has sent me an intro which says, while watching this episode, The Six Thatchers, I was blown away by the quality of the writing, which inspired me to put together this costume as a tribute to their hard work. You've timed that perfectly. That's, I see what you've done there.
Yeah, this is about all the effort that I felt like they rated from the writing in this episode. So,
yeah. So you kind of mirrored that costume-wise. I like it. It's good. You just had that box lying around already, didn't you? Like, it's like that was already under my desk. I did it at the last minute.
Well, I went to minimal effort. I walked all the way out to the garage. So
okay, so that's
I put in a little bit.
Okay, well, you know what? That probably does match about, I guess, the cadence of the effort put into this one. Yeah, look, we'll get to it. But holy crap! I mean, I said last time that I was worried about this season. I might have been underplaying it a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was not worried enough. I was like, it'll hold up.
You were in too good of a mood after the last episode. I reckon that was the big issue. Is like it put me in a really good space, and then I sat down to watch this, and I was like, God damn. Jesus. All right. Welcome back to Give Up After 3, a critical analysis of BBC Sherlock, examining each episode to understand how things went so wrong that fans invented a secret final episode to justify why the show had been bad all along. You can find show notes and sources at zeroindent.com/giveupafter3. And if you want episodes early, head over to patreon.com/zeroindent to support us. You could be listening to the entirety of season 4. You could be listening to the whole ending of this show right now because of time. Time works that way. I'm DC McNeil, author and editor-in-chief at Zero Indent, and I'm joined as always by Darth. What's up, Darth? How you doing?
Hello there. I was doing way better before I started preparing for this episode.
This was brutal. Look, it's the start of season 4. We're talking about episode 1, The Six Thatchers. This was directed by Rachel Talayale. It was written by Mark Gaddis. It originally aired on the 1st of January 2017. It opened to approximately 11.64 million UK viewers. There isn't really many content disclaimers for this episode, except don't watch it if you like good television. This one is... This is the first episode of Sherlock that doesn't feature suicide somehow, which is impressive. This is adapted from kind of vaguely the plot elements of The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb and The Adventure of the Yellowface. A lot of people claim that it's really heavily based on The Engineer's Thumb, but I don't see it. But that's neither here nor there. Darth, tell me about your experience watching this the first time and then coming back to it, because I have some interesting thoughts.
There were parts of it that I have always loved, and those parts I still love, but they just do not overshadow the rest of it that is so bad. And I think that a whole lot of it might just be the same thing, like the same issue that I have with the sequel trilogy. Like, it builds a poor foundation. It's not that necessarily the stuff in it is bad, although it is, but it builds such a poor foundation for later on. I'm like, with the choices that they took for this episode, they affect the entire rest of the season and the entire possibility of more seasons in such a drastic way that I don't know if the story that they chose is worth it to have all of those drastic consequences down the line.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. Okay. I think you've articulated, my key issue with it very well, which is that this episode changes what's possible in the show in such a drastic way that you would. I think you're right. You would want this to be like the best episode of your show to justify these changes, right? I think in an episode like last episode that we watched, which was the kind of season 3, season 4 bridging Christmas special, if you had a change so drastic like that, like the realization that Moriarty is still dead, it justifies itself by being contained in an extremely good episode of television. I think you're right. I'm unclear what they were going for in this episode. Like, I'll try and talk about it throughout, but I think my biggest issue with it is it's really unfocused, and and as a result of that, the tone jumps around so dramatically, not just from like act to act, but scene to scene in a way that, like, it starts off kind of trying to be goofy, and then it cuts to like a really serious parable, and then it cuts back to normal, Sherlock and Watson and Mary, and then it wants to be serious again, and then it wants to be like a story about like, spies and PTSD, and then it wants to, and it never really seems to find the tone that it should be. Like, I don't know, there are episodes previously that have been dark and involving, but still managed to stick the balance of the kind of campy quips with the seriousness of the actual content. And this feels like anytime someone tries to do a funny, it feels incredibly forced, in a way that's hard to kind of, I don't know. It's like there's no oxygen in the room in any of these shots. I don't know how else to explain it. I definitely felt that this episode.
Yeah, like my overall summation was that this is probably now, I think I've already said this at least once, if not twice, though, that like now this is my least favorite episode, when before I would have probably said, I don't know what my least favorite episode is. They're all relatively decent. But like at one point, like Rye is always saying, like I was picking up my phone to start scrolling on Reddit because I was so bored.
Yeah.
And that was actually literally during a fight scene, which should have had me totally engrossed. Mm-hmm. And I had to stop myself. I was like, you're supposed to be preparing. You can't ignore it, even if it's bad.
It was the pool fight scene, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Because that was when I paused it and I played the next 15 minutes of the other TV show I was watching, and then paused that and then came back to this. I'll talk about.
I should have done that.
Yeah.
I just suffered.
I'll talk about my process after the summary, because this. Okay, to quickly summarize for those, if this is for some reason your first episode, or if you just need a reminder. So my process for this show is I watch the full episode in one sitting, and then I do a bunch of research, take a bunch of notes, and then I watch it a second time, pausing it, taking notes. This is usually quite an effective technique because the first time watching it through, I get the experience of the viewer, and then I get to kind of do the project that we have been doing through the second viewing, and I can skip around and check details and fact check my previous notes and research and things like that. This one, I'll read the summary and then I'll explain what happened with that process for this episode, because it did change, and I think it's going to have to change for the rest of the season. Also, this is the first summary I didn't write. This one I've just copy-pasted from Wikipedia, because that's how little I cared about what happened in this episode. So, just heads up. If this is terribly written, it's because whoever wrote it on Wikipedia sucks. Mycroft presents doctored footage of Charles Augustus Magnuson's death, so that it appears to the public as though Magnuson was shot by a sniper. Sherlock and a committee chaired by Lady Smallwood are in attendance. Sherlock is freed and resolves to wait for Moriarty's posthumous revenge. Mary Watson gives birth to a daughter who is named Rosamund Mary. John befriends a woman he met on a bus. It's hinted that they might have an affair, and we'll get to that later. Mycroft and Scotland Yard detectives, including Greg Lestrade, bring Sherlock various cases, hoping it will reveal Moriarty's scheme. One case involves the son of the Conservative cabinet minister Charlie Wesselborough. The son is found dead in a car crash despite having been on a gap year in Tibet. Sherlock quickly solves the case and reveals that the son was hiding in the car, planning to surprise the father, but died from a seizure. Sherlock notes a missing bust of Margaret Thatcher at the victim's home, finding it was stolen and smashed on the front porch. Lestrade reveals to Sherlock that 4 other busts made in the same series have been smashed. Hunting the final one, Sherlock encounters the culprit. They fight, but the culprit escapes. In the center of the last bust is a memory stick, bearing the initials Agra. Questioned by Sherlock, Mary relates her past as a freelance agent on the team called Agra. Each had a memory stick containing their confidential material, lest anyone be betrayed by another. 6 years prior, a rescue mission of hostages at the British Embassy in Tbilisi went wrong when a coup d'etat set off by the code word ammo killed everybody except AJ and Mary. Sherlock tries to stop Mary from going after AJ, but Mary drugs him and escapes. Once again, Sherlock is incapable of remembering that she's a spy. Wikipedia didn't write that down, I added that. Mary travels across the world following a random path, but having planted a tracking device in the memory stick, Sherlock and John follow her to Morocco. AJ arrives and attempts to kill them all. During which, AJ reveals that while being tortured in Tbilisi, he heard the words ammo and the English woman, thus assuming it was Mary. He then escaped and hid the memory stick in a half-made bust, and then sought revenge on Mary, believing she had betrayed them. They fight, but AJ is shot randomly by a local police officer who steps into the fray. Sherlock deduces that ammo should be amo, the Latin word for I love, suggesting Lady Smallwood, whose codename is Love. Questioned by Mycroft, Smallwood claims to be innocent. Sherlock then meets Smallwood's secretary, Vivian Norbury, in the London Aquarium. Vivian confesses she tipped off the terrorists in Georgia using the code word amo, thus eliminating the hostages and the team and the Agra team. Her motive was killing the British ambassador, who had found out that Vivian had stolen national secrets, etc., etc. John and Mycroft and the police arrive, and Vivian shoots at Sherlock, but Mary jumps in the way, taking the bullet. Mary professes her love and gratitude for both John and Sherlock, and then dies in John's arms. John, grief-stricken, blames Sherlock, who had vowed to protect her. In his home, Mycroft finds a sticky note reading the 13th and goes to Sharonford. Sherlock visits John's therapist, but is unable to discuss his issues. Mrs. Hudson gives Sherlock a DVD, which is a posthumous message from Mary. In the video, Mary asks Sherlock to, quote, save John Watson. Sherlock attempts to visit John, but Molly informs Sherlock that John wishes for anyone's help except his. Wow, that was really poorly written Wikipedia. I'm going to have to go in and make some suggested edits to that. That was really bad. Look, so I want to explain what happened with my process. So, as I said, I've been doing the same thing for each episode so far. Even the wedding episode, I was able to do that. My second watch through, I just found nothing to pause about. I was able to watch it, let it run. Found this episode so hard to get through the first time that I kind of reversed my process. I watched half of it, then I did all of my research, and then I finished the second half of it, and then I went to press play. I went to watch it a second time the other night, and I watched 20 minutes, and then I watched an episode of Community, and then I watched 20 minutes, and then I watched an episode of Community until I watched the whole thing. So a bit of a different method for this one, but it was the only way I could get through it. This is just, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just, it's a level of lazy we haven't really seen before. Let's try and get stuck into it. This is going to be a difficult one, I think. I have lots of interesting historical context around this. Even at the time, people were not thrilled about this off the back of the special, and how much the special engaged the fan base. This episode took a lot of legwork for the fans to become engaged with. And so the theories become increasingly ridiculous, which we'll kind of touch on as we get into the big plot stuff that you've already alluded to. So we start with Mycroft briefing Sherlock on the official story of Charles Magnuson, who was killed by Sherlock in the previous episode. Despite how serious the situation is, Sherlock goofs around and ends up asking the secretary, Vivian Norbury, about ice lollies, as well as explaining he loves ginger nut cookies, or biscuits rather. The episode proper opens with a monologue from Sherlock telling the story of a merchant who comes into contact with death as a figure. Despite his attempts, he cannot escape his fate. What did you think about Sherlock just faffing about here? Just having a faff.
The note that I have is that this is my least favorite introduction out of all of the episodes that we've seen so far. Like, for the most part, the intros have at least gripped your interest coming into it. Some of them have been funny, entertaining. Some of them have been dramatic and start off with deaths and stuff. But this one, I did not like anything about it. And the initial reaction, I think, is to go after Benedict and say that it was overacted. And I don't think that's the case. I think he did exactly what the directors were telling him to, that they wanted something this over the top, and where like you literally couldn't tell if he was high or not, which
Yeah.
was the joke thrown around in the scene. And I think every decision regarding that was just wrong. Like he shouldn't have had that mannerism coming off of the special. Like the way that they tried with the dialogue to tie the special in with this in some ways. Like Sherlock already knows what Moriarty is doing, sort of, because he solved it in the special. But they don't tie the theme together. They don't tie the feeling together. I don't really know the best way to describe it, but it doesn't feel like if you watched one and go into the other, they feel like completely different things on some like primal level. And I don't know if it's just because like that level of goofiness doesn't tie in with him almost killing himself in a drug induced state, or or
Yeah, I think what they were going. I think you're right. What they were going for is he's trying to be flippant and play off the fact that the plane was no big deal. But the way that it comes across is that it feels like the show is forcing that flippancy on the scene. Like it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel natural. It's like Sherlock being a big piss baby is something we've seen before, and it's annoying, but it can feel naturalized because he's quite good at it. This feels like they either didn't go far enough with the goofs where we could tell he was forcing it, or it was too goofy for it to be related to the drugs. And like they never split the upright. Like it never feels one or the other, and I get that the ambiguity is part of what they're going for, but what you end up with is a really flat scene where it's sort of Sherlock just has no chemistry with anyone in this scene. And I think that's part of the problem is even with Mycroft, there's just nothing, like there's no tension there. There's no chemistry there. It's just like, it feels forced in a way that's hard to articulate.
I think I just figured out why it doesn't work, and I don't know how. Like this has got to be on like a subconscious level that we're not thinking about that this is the reason, but why is he so happy? That's the foundation of what we're frustrated about. Why is he happy? The idea is that he's happy because he has this awesome new case. He doesn't have the awesome new case because he solved it last episode. Yeah. He even tells them Moriarty is not alive. He did all of this stuff before he died. This is all going to play out in a pre-planned thing. So it's not like he can be excited because he has a mystery to solve. He says, I have to just wait and see what happens. So there's nothing, like everything about him being excited is contrived for the scene and not actually for what the character would actually be excited about.
Yeah, because here, what are you going to do? And he replies with, wait. We've seen bored Sherlock before, and bored Sherlock is insufferable. Like, he cannot handle being bored. And this is basically like like, he is being sentenced to sit around and wait for something to happen. That's like his worst nightmare. But then he's pretending, he's kind of playing it off like this is something he wants. It just feels really like disconnected from his character. I hadn't really, that's a really good point. I will say, in contrast, the monologue, the kind of parable that we get, I thought was really interesting and set a really good tone. I was like, give me this show every day of the week. This is like, especially like Cumberbatch with that voice, and you just like, it's so captivating, and the imagery of the shark in the aquarium. It's extremely good. I will say one thing that this opening scene does do is it call our attention to Vivian Norbury as the second person in the room. So we get our setup for later where we've got Smallwood and Norbury. And we also discount Norbury because Sherlock is being flippant toward her. That's the credit that I'm going to give this scene. But yeah, man, that monologue is really excellent and sets up a pretty interesting dynamic around Sherlock, Mycroft, and who Sherlock is now versus who he was as a kid. We get a little bit of commentary of that throughout between Mycroft and Sherlock. With sort of, this parable is like you can't escape your fate. And then obviously the irony of the way that parable ends is, for those who haven't watched the episode, basically it's a parable about this guy who realizes that death is out to get him. And so he sees death in the market one morning, and death seems surprised to see him, and so he flees to a different city, Samara. And then later that evening in Samara, Death finds him and he says to Death, "Why were you so surprised to see, why were you, I thought I could escape you." And Death is like, "Yeah, I was surprised to see you this morning because I had an appointment with you tonight in Samara." And so it's that idea of like, it doesn't matter how hard you try, fate will play out the way it's always going to. And we get this commentary from Mycroft later on. Actually, maybe I'll save that for later because I did think it was a really interesting scene. But that's kind of setting up this idea of when things are in motion, you cannot escape your past, or you cannot escape the inevitable, which seems to be the theme of this episode, despite the plot of the episode maybe contradicting that a bit.
Yeah, I love that whole story, and the whole Samara thing has, like, I don't think hardly anything to do with the actual episode. The only thing that it has to do with is, conceivably, would be Moriarty and how he can't get away from him, because it's every action he takes to get away just actually leads him right into Moriarty's trap. But that has nothing to do with this episode whatsoever.
Yeah.
So all of that beautiful imagery and all of the great dialogue telling that story is almost wasted. Like, even when Vivian is talking about it at the end, and I'm like, your explanation doesn't really make sense to me for the situation that you're in. It just is a really cool story, so they want to keep using it.
It's to me it seems like Gaddis heard this, someone telling this story in the writer's room, and was like, we're putting that in this episode, but didn't stop to be like, does it make sense to be in this episode? Yeah.
Which is hilarious, because I just went back and got a clip from our Wookiee podcast when you were talking. You did a whole 15 minutes about killing your darlings and how important that is.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like,
you have to be disciplined in that way. You have to be like, this is cool, but it doesn't have a place in this narrative. It is like pulling teeth. Like, to cut a scene I had to cut an entire character from book 3 that I was like, oh, this is like, how cool would this be? But then looking at it objectively, I was like, this is indulgent and it doesn't have a place here. And it sucked because it was a cool scene and it was a really cool way to bring this character back. But I was like, it's distracting. It pulls you away from the story you're trying to tell. And this feels like a tone setter, which I think you can do. I think you can have moments like this that set a tone that don't necessarily have to directly relate to the plot, but they have to relate to the theme or something in the episode kind of tangibly. And like I said before, this episode's so unfocused that to say that this episode is about something is difficult, and that's what makes this feel like it doesn't really connect to anything.
It's interesting. You could actually probably cut this entire opening sequence before the Samara story. You could probably open right on that, and it would cut all the ridiculousness with Sherlock at the beginning there. You would lose a few bits of important dialogue where he says he already knows Moriarty's plan and stuff, but you also get those hints throughout the rest of the episode where he's like, is this him? Is he doing this? And so I don't think you even need that opening bit at all, aside from the fact that the writers, which I've said this all, every episode, I think, they want to introduce the killer or the method of killing in that intro, which they did. So
I guess technically, yes, they did. Yeah. Okay, so John and Mary Watson welcome the arrival of a baby daughter, who they name Rosamund. We'll talk later about why this is really weird. At the same time, following the events of the Abominable Bride, Sherlock has become obsessed with working out his arch-enemy Moriarty's posthumous revenge, working with Mycroft and various Scotland Yard detectives like Greg, trying to solve seemingly trivial cases, hoping it will lead them to a larger scheme. He investigates a case where the son of a rich couple, Charlie Westerborough, is found dead in a car wreck despite seemingly being on a gap year in Nepal. Sherlock very rapidly solves this one, which then leads him to the smashed bust of Margaret Thatcher. So I haven't really written many notes until, I guess, we get through some of these busts being smashed. But what I would like to kind of note here is there's this there's a contrivance to the Charlie Westerborough case where the contrivance of the death having nothing to do with the bust being smashed, and then this leading Sherlock onto the case that he thinks is Moriarty that then turns out to be Mary, is something that you should they should have said out loud in the writer's room and gone, this is too many contrivances on top of each other. it feels very like I don't know what a better word is than lazy. Like you can have two kinds of motivators for a scene to occur. You can have active forces in your story, or you can have passive forces in your story. And so a passive force is something like two characters. Think about it at the start of a rom-com. Two characters are going about their day and they bump into each other in a coffee shop, right? That's a passive interaction. There's no active protagonism in that interaction, that meet cute. That's different than, say, like an active force in your story, which would be, say, an active force might be, I'm going out. I've chosen to go to my partner's house to break up with them. I've made an active decision, and the scene opens with me arriving. I've actively come to that scene. Or indeed, say in like an action film, an active choice might be James Bond deciding I'm going to ignore orders and go after the bad guy anyway. A passive choice in that kind of story might be, he's sitting in a bar and happens to bump into a woman who ends up being related to the case in some way. So the trick with a lot of storytelling, and one of the like biggest pro tips that you can give to any new writer or to punch up any script or any sort of story is thinking about how you balance when and where you swap passive and active. Sean Coyne and the Story Grid have different words that they use for this. Obviously, being a modernist myself, like I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of their structural stuff. But one thing that Sean Coyne always talks about is when you do that, both of those types of forces need to either be positive or negative in their initialization and then their outcome. So if you have let's say a positive active moment, so let's say that I go to the shops to buy groceries and I buy a lottery ticket and I win the lotto. That's like a positive active moment where I've gone there and I've bought a lottery ticket and I've won. The negative consequence of that might be that, I'm trying to think of like an example from maybe like the Fugitive or something like that, or Enemy of the State, where it's like suddenly you're a target or your family treats you differently or something, right? You have a positive active action that has a negative consequence. We might have like a negative active action, like in a story, maybe, a character cheats on their spouse and that has, ramifications moving forward. But you would then want to have either like positive to negative, negative to positive, or positive to double positive, or negative to double negative. So in the cheating example, they do something bad, and then it has like a negative consequence in their relationship, but then also maybe they get fired or something like that, or has some other ramification. And so when you pair a careful selection of active versus passive, and you have those valence shifts where you're moving from positive to negative, negative to positive, positive to positive plus, negative to negative plus, you get rhythm, and you get you get a feeling of momentum in a story. And one of the things that this episode really struggles with, and that this show in general has always struggled with, is they sort of have they deploy this use of montage, I guess, to convey the core thrust of the Sherlock Holmes stories, which is the cases being solved. They always do it through montage, and montage can be well used, but the problem with montage is montage, by definition, is passive, because you're not actually having complete scenes, you're getting, like, told information. And so what we end up with in this episode, for the most part, is a series of passive kind of scenes playing out with forces of active protagonism within them. Sure, Sherlock's solving cases, but then the coincidence that leads them to the coincidences that lead Sherlock to working out to finding the bust in the first place, to then finding the other busts, to then working out that it's not Moriarty. That's all kind of coincidence strung together on top of passive scenes. And so just kind of like, you just sort of watch this stuff happen, and it's hard to get invested because there's no friction necessarily. Like, you're not feeling that valence shift from, oh my God, he did something for the right reason and it worked out terribly, or now he's in the best of bad choices scenario where there's no good options and he's got to try and find his way through this problem. You just kind of like see Sherlock do this stuff. You get to see some of the fun character tension, but certainly I think those fundamentals of storytelling are missing in this episode, and that's kind of why, I guess, at a formal level, I think that's why a lot of this, when we talk about these scenes moving forward, getting into the actual plot, that's why a lot of these scenes just kind of like, it's happening in the, like you said, the action's supposed to be good, and I guess it's fine, but then you don't really care about it because there's none of that pacing and tension.
That may be the reason why the whole thing with John potentially cheating just feels so off and so sudden, is because they use these like passive montages so much that you're never able to get into anyone's heads throughout the entire episode. It's just like you're being like thrown from one scene into another, but you don't know why the characters are going anywhere or doing the stuff that they're doing. Because you just have all of this, like the whole travel montage with Mary going all over the world. Like, I loved it, but I couldn't figure out why she was doing it. Like, there were so many things in this episode that I'm like, why are the characters doing what they're doing? But it's very entertaining to watch.
That's a really, yeah. I know. I think it's weird. We either spend not enough time with each character during those cutaways, or we spend just too much time. Like it's a different version of this is a technique that Stephen King did a lot kind of in the 80s when he was in like the height of his kind of like sci-fi horror kind of space. Is he has this really great technique where he can kind of take you through like the morning routine of like an entire town. There's a brilliant scene in Salem's Lot, which is the first time he does it, where you sort of follow everybody's morning routine at the first part of the novel, and you see what their normal life is like. And it's all really interesting because they're like these people with these interior lives, and you get a real sense for like what these relationships are like and where their tensions and challenges and difficulties are. And then halfway through the book, you get another of the same scene, but now, in the background, in the town, there are vampires that are like hiding and people are going missing. And then you get the final version of this toward the end of the story where the town is overrun by vampires and all you're getting is the few survivors slowly getting picked off. And it's this brilliant way to kind of show the death of this space. But the reason it works well is you spend just enough time with each of the characters that you inhabit, and then it kind of slides off them into somebody else that you get a real sense for their interiority. You get a sense for like what motivates them. So like, if it's a dad that's running a farm, like money is a going concern. Or if it's a high school boy, maybe he's thinking about comic books and he's trying to, save up enough money so he can buy some weed off the guy, the drug dealer at school or whatever. These really clear motivators that make these people feel tangible and specific. And I think the lack of specificity means that we don't, like, I get on paper why Mary's like, yeah, okay, like I'll disappear or whatever. I get it on paper, but what I don't get is the tangible motivator for, and this is why she didn't, accept Sherlock and John's help. We get John reading a letter, but that's not quite the same thing as understanding, even just briefly, the interiority of Mary and her motivation. I think you contrast that with the previous season's episode that deals with Mary's past, where we praised that episode a lot for making Mary this really compelling, rounded character who we understood her motivation at all times. And there's that brilliant scene where she's walking down that street. I think it's like Lancaster Gardens or something like that. And you get, she's on the earpiece to Sherlock. And you have this back and forth between them where she works out the lie of the gardens or whatever, which is the front of the building, which turns out to be one of Sherlock's bolt holes. We praise that scene because very, very succinctly and neatly, the show tells us or shows us without telling us exactly what Mary's thinking and why she's thinking it and what motivates her. And I think you contrast that with this sequence of her kind of, as you say, going around the world, or indeed Sherlock solving these cases, John raising the kid, and you just kind of like, there's not enough specificity, like the world building isn't there. You think about how textured that the lie of the gardens thing felt, like how real that felt, and whether or not it's a real thing is irrelevant. Like, it feels real to the story, and this stuff just feels like usually there's a bit more tension involved in trying to like travel around the world. Like, you kind of go like, well, where did she get the money? Where are the connections here? And these questions just fall away because there's nothing to grab onto. You just don't really sort of, there's a lack of, there's too much specificity, and in doing so reveals the lack of specificity, and it can't balance either properly. It was a very lengthy. I was trying to verbalize my interior thought there. I think you're right. These montages just don't work. That was a 15-minute structural explanation of why these montages don't work. Is there anything in here that you like, that you enjoyed, or anything else that you wanted to call particular attention to?
So my note for this first little section that we were just talking about was everything was awful until the rattle joke. That was my one
That was pretty
note.
funny. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I loved how they set that up, and like the kid is sitting in John's chair, so it actually looks like Sherlock would be talking to him. So I loved that scene. I loved the little bit where I think this was where Lestrade was outside the door talking to the other girl, or was that later?
That's
detective?
later. Yeah.
Okay, so he just walks in at this point. Either way, I love this mystery. Maybe it doesn't make sense how quickly he solved it, but the idea of the two types of vinyl was like immediately apparent in the report. And I guess
Yeah.
it was odd enough that even Greg picked it up, although he didn't realize what it meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I loved that. It sounds weird to say I loved that death, but I
I loved when that kid got. That was my favorite part of the episode.
It was
Dot gets
it was
canceled.
very inventive, I guess.
I thought
you
so.
know, it wasn't.
Yeah, I thought it was
Yeah.
inventive. It was very inventive. Where you would get here's the thing, Darth. Were I to want to surprise a relative by returning home from a gap year, this is the weirdest fucking way to do it. Like, where would you even go to find a seat cover that you could then adapt into a costume? Why would you do it? It's a lot, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll do you one better. Why wouldn't you just lean over so you can't be seen from outside, and then you pop up?
Oh yeah,
instead
or
of
just
spending
hide in the back seat and pop up, or yeah.
yeah, whatever. Instead of spending a couple $100 building this thing or buying this thing.
I guess you're a rich kid. You got nothing but time on your hands.
That is true. Like they they had a lot of money.
These motherfuckers be loaded.
Yeah.
I will say I quite like the way that Sherlock is written in his interaction with the parents, where like I think in a previous season he would have been really goofy and aggressive and like really, really dismissive. But he sort of balances his interest in the bust and Thatcher. Like I think Cumberbatch's performance here holds this scene together well, where it never really he doesn't. I think in a previous season this would have been unbearable to watch because it would have been like Sherlock knows better than this, but he manages to balance the line between like his own self-interest in the bust and talking to the parents like people. I don't know whether that shows character growth or whether the particular way that this scene played out just happened to ride that line better than we've seen previously, but I think it sticks to landing more than we've seen previously.
I don't know. It's so hard to read him in that scene because I want to say that this is the most confused that we've ever seen him, because this is the first example I think that we have seen him intuiting something, and he's not like outright observing. You know, he doesn't know what he's seeing. He's sensing something, and that breaks his brain a little bit because he knows that he doesn't know, but he knows he should know something.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in the next scene. Yep. He just psychics the fact that the Thatcher bust is important. Okay. Well, we'll talk about it when we get the specific exchange with Mycroft. One line I really liked is as they're walking outside, Lestrade's like, "That was amazing. Like, how did you do it?" And Sherlock says to him, quote, "I don't like the arrogance to ignore details. I'm not the police," which I thought was an excellent line.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to talk.
That was a great line.
We should. Fuck, I don't want to talk about it. It sucks. We should talk about the scene with Mycroft, and I guess the implications about fate and intelligence and data and intuition. We should talk about that because I have some real interesting. I think yeah. Do you have anything on these other scenes before we get to Sherlock, the psychic guy?
One thing we should point out is that the writers did a little good bit of foreshadowing, because when they're going into the house, Mary calls them up and she's asking for details, and then she drops the line, "You'd be amazed what a receptionist picks up. They know everything." So a real good bit of foreshadowing towards the villain at the end of the episode. For the Mycroft thing, for that entire scene, I just wrote LOL. And like, ironically, like I think I mostly enjoyed it because especially the baby thing. Like, Sherlock hands him a picture of the baby, and Mycroft is like, why am I looking at this thing?
That Mycroft is extremely. They've really narrowed in on him, on like what makes him funny. That he's just an absolute alien man. And he's very entertaining to watch. I will say, for all of the shit that I give him, I think that Gaddis. I simply wouldn't have cast myself in my own TV show, but Gaddis has this like cadence to the way that he kind of to the way that he reacts to things, where like the timing is so precise, where it's sort of. I think a different show would try and make this really slapstick, but he reacts really slowly to stuff and is sort of like, I don't understand why you've brought this to me. And it's him trying to be like, am I missing something obvious? And it's very, because it's like normal social cues, which is very, very good. He reminds me a lot of some engineers I work with, where they're unintentionally very funny sometimes. And when you explain it to them, they're like, oh yeah, that is hilarious. But like, okay, I'll try and set up the scene. So Sherlock realizes that these busts are important for some reason, and he goes to. So the way that this plays out now, remind me, because there's two sequences with Mycroft. Does he go to the rich person's house and fight AJ, and then go to Mycroft? Does he go to Mycroft, fight AJ, and then take this, and then he goes to Mycroft first, then finds the bust? Because
he goes, I'm scrolling through. He goes to Mycroft directly after leaving the mansion the first time.
Yes.
So, which is odd, because like you said, he goes from an OCD moment of why is there this hole in the middle of the table to this must be Moriarty, and then he goes to talk to his brother and says this thing must be Moriarty. Which is so weird, because like the initial problem that he has is purely OCD, which is just hilarious. And then he realizes, like, because like the entire thing that triggered it is like this, symmetrically, this doesn't look right. There should be a thing here.
Yeah.
And then his brain thinks, why isn't the thing there? And then he sees, oh, the thing couldn't have fallen because of the rug, so someone had to pick it up and carry it away, but they wouldn't do that because this is too perfectly preserved. So what happened to it? And then, oh, someone stole it. Why would they steal this in this huge rich mansion? They stole a plaster or whatever figurine. Like, nothing about it makes sense. And I absolutely think that he should have explored this, but jumping to it being Moriarty makes zero sense.
Yeah.
It's just that his brain is now wired that anything he can't figure out, he thinks must be this case that Moriarty put in place before he died.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't necessarily think that it's the, psychic thing like you were saying. I think that his character is just literally looking for stuff in the wrong place because he's so obsessed, although it doesn't really show in his actions that he's so obsessed with Moriarty. But that's kind of what I'm getting from him focusing so much and so quickly on those busts being Moriarty's grand plan. I want to say this, like, I don't have this written down. I want to make sure I say it because I'll forget. You were talking about how like the entire point of him going after them was XYZ, because it was Moriarty. So he thinks that the Busts are Moriarty and that he's going after them, and then he finds out at the very end that it was this stick inside there that's the Agra thing. But then right before that, when he smashes it, he says, "Look and behold, the black pearl of the Borgias,"
Yes.
or however you pronounce it, because I'm an American. So at some point, his character switched from thinking this was all a Moriarty plot to thinking, "Oh, I'm going to solve this incredibly."
I did pick up on when that was, that was when Lestrade and the woman from Interpol are having their exchange outside his door. So that happens.
Yeah.
That happens between. So he goes to Micro. So this plays out. No, you're right. Okay, that happens before he goes to the mansion because Interpol are trying to convince him to track down the Black Pearl. And he's like, "That's a dumb case. Why would I care about a pearl?" And then when he gets to the mansion, he thinks so he goes.
No, it's right after.
Is it?
I'm looking at it. Yeah.
What the
fuck?
Yeah,
he talks to his brother, then they go back to the apartment, and then the woman is there with Greg, and they're going up, and then the cross-dressing dude is up there.
Got it. Okay. Fuck. See, this episode's so the plot is so confusing. Because there's no main driver. Okay, let me set up the Mycroft scene really quick because I want to talk about it. So Sherlock goes to Mycroft to ask for advice on, hey, what's going on? Does this mean anything to you? Did Moriarty talk about any of this stuff? Was he a fan of Margaret Thatcher, etc., etc.? And we get this quote where, so they're talking, and Sherlock's like, "I don't know why, but my intuition is telling me this is related or important." And Mycroft goes, "What? What are you, fucking psychic, bro? Like, what's going on?" And Sherlock says, quote, "The world is woven from billions of lives, every strand crossing every other. What we call premonition is just movements of the web. If you could attenuate to every strand of quivering data, the future would be entirely calculable, as inevitable as mathematics." Which is a very interesting thing to say. A lot of fans misread this as Sherlock claiming to have the ability to do this. I think what Sherlock is implying here is... Because Mycroft's like, "You're having a premonition, brother mine." And Sherlock's defense of this premonition is... Essentially what he's saying is, I've realized something on an elemental level, but I don't know what it is. Like, my subconscious has figured something out that my conscious mind hasn't. Which is not the same thing as I think the way that some people interpreted this, which is him saying this is what he's doing. Now, in an episode, in 2 episodes from now, there is a character who can do this. But the thing that Sherlock is driving at is he's so smart because he has spent his entire life learning how to solve shit that his subconscious is doing things in the background for him that he is not privy to until they kind of reveal themselves. Now, that's not that unusual. I don't think, if you work in a particular craft for a long time, there are things there are background processes happening, and you'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, "Oh my God, I've solved how that thing has to resolve in chapter 5 or whatever." That's a thing people experience. The way that Sherlock frames it here is a bit confusing because, like we've just said, he kind of he knows the busts are important, and then he kind of keeps switching the reason as to why. His brain has figured out that it's important and why it's important, and he's kind of testing different jigsaw pieces to see if they fit in that hole. And that's kind of the process he's going through. He's like, I know this is related to something important. Is it Moriarty? No. Is it this pearl? No. Oh, it's Mary. I would never have thought of Mary. And so he's kind of trying to fit as many pegs into this round hole until he finds the one that fits. And that could be really compelling, but it's really hard to track what's going on. Like we just said, we had to actually look at the reference footage to be like, what is the sequence of events here? That's not something we have to do a lot on this show. Especially, but the nature of this project is we're viewing the show in a way that a normal viewer doesn't. We pay a lot of attention to the detail and the plot. The fact that I couldn't remember, I watched this yesterday, and I couldn't remember that shit. That's not good. as much as I criticize Moffat's writing, I could probably tell you the plot of like every episode of season 5 and 6 of Doctor Who. Like, and I've only, I've seen them a handful of times, but like there's something about the way that these montages and then the switching and the fact that the question is subconscious, all of it comes together to just be like, what is happening? But I wanted to call attention to that. Yeah.
So like normally it's one thing is like it's very location based. So like you go from point A where you don't know anything, you go to a different location where you learn XYZ, then you go to a third location where it reveals this. And so you're able to really remember the plot of the story based on the location we're in. So it's a lot easier in most shows, but and I don't know if it's this one or if it's a Sherlock thing, but they always keep bouncing back to his home base of their apartment living room. And I don't know how confusing that makes following the actual progression of the plot, because it really muddies things up. But I don't know how legitimate that is, because that was just a brain blast.
No, that's a you've actually hit on like something that I guess at a structural level is kind of important. One of the ways in which you can make stories clear to consume is you tie location to event. So like think about Star Wars, right? The first Star Wars I'm thinking about specifically. Tatooine has a series of events that occur there that feel very discrete. Then you get on the Millennium Falcon and you have a series of discrete events that happen on the Falcon. And then you move to different locations and different things happen. And you don't you don't come back to Tatooine halfway through the fucking film. Yes, the Falcon is there, but that's their like car basically. One of the things that's hard to do in story is if locations don't have meaningful events happen there. Say in like a sitcom, right? If everything's happening in the same 4 or 5 rooms, you can get away with it because location isn't important. You're focused entirely on plot and character drama. For a detective story like this, the location you normally come back to would be like you think about like Criminal Minds or something like that, the FBI headquarters or wherever they've set up. But one thing, or like House MD, it's the the office space they have. They always come back to the main room where they have the whiteboard and stuff. One of the challenges this show has is, like you've just put your finger on, we're not coming back to Baker Street like we normally do on a case, where it's like, okay, we're coming back, we're gonna work through some evidence and it's all up on the walls and stuff. It's like we're coming back and there's another case, or there's a different case, or it's a different idea, or it's like we don't come back to home base to work on the same thing. We come back to home base and we're focused on something different, or okay, the kid's here now, or no, okay, now it's about Mary, and no, it's about there's the reason for coming back is different every time, and so it becomes harder to track than it would in a normal episode when we come back to Baker Street. Which is just kind of like an interesting thing to observe in a script, I guess, is or in any story, is like how often locations are used and kind of what that can say. I mean, typically what you want to do is let's say it's like a bottle in the story in a bottle. So think of like the first Alien film. It's a really great example. You get the opening sequence gives you a pretty clear view of what does the ship look like, how does it function. You get an idea of the players within the ship. You get a really good sense of all the different locations that are going to be important to the plot later. And then when things go wrong, you revisit those locations in the same sequence with which they were presented in the introduction. So you go, okay, we start with them waking up, and then you have the quarters, and then you go, you go down into the industrial kind of belly of the ship, and then you kind of go past the science bay and the medical bay, and then you go to the kitchen. And when things go wrong, things play out in that same sequence, and so your brain subconsciously finds it really easy to track what's occurring. And so each location is imbued with the meaning of the events that happened there, but you've already seen it, so you have a sense of the physicality of the space. It's a really common technique, and it's really hard to pull off in a way that doesn't feel really like forced and clicky. One of the best versions of this of all time. I mean, the obvious challenge there is when you do that first walkthrough of the space, or you get the first idea of the locations, it needs to not feel like somebody's giving you exposition. One of the best versions of this, which I've referenced before, is in Mad Men, when you get one of the characters, it's Peggy's first day as a secretary, and you get one of the characters showing her around the office, and telling her who all the main players are, and like, oh, you know, this is Don Draper and this is this other guy. And as he's doing it, he's also trying to sleep with her. And so your focus is on the fact that he's being skeezy and trying to sleep with her, but you get the rundown of the entire office and you get the whole exposition of how it works, kind of, I guess, like smuggled through this other thing that's happening. And then as the show goes on, you obviously revisit those spaces in extraordinary detail and et cetera and so forth. But certainly there are ways you can do it that feel really organic. And the show, for the most part, has been pretty good about that, like locations in general. The aquarium in this one's an interesting one to keep your eye on because we don't see it in the first sequence. We just get the shark kind of overlay. And then that Sherlock seems to conflate that with Moriarty, sort of. Yeah, it's very squinty about what they're trying to do with location. But by way of contrast, that's how you do it well. If that helps align why it might be feeling weird to you or why the space might feel misused.
Yeah, I have no other notes until we get to the fight scene.
God, yeah, okay. So Sherlock works out, hey, I know where the final bust is, and he waits and ambushes the guy who's coming to smash the bust. They get into kind of a long, protracted sort of like fight scene in a pool, and then the police arrive and Sherlock smashes the bust and discovers that there is a memory stick inside called Agra. Yeah, we've already said this, but I also tuned out during this fight. I was like, I'm not interested in this at all. It was too long for some. I don't know. It didn't work for me. It's too long. It was hard to track what was really going on. It didn't feel like either of them were really trying to hurt each other necessarily. I don't know. Didn't work for me.
Yeah. Like there were, I don't know if logistically is the right word, but there were like so many problems. Like the residents of the house never heard all of this. Never heard the cops show up. Like they never come out of their bedrooms, which is smart. You shouldn't come out. You should stay in there, call the cops. But still, in most movies, the resident would acknowledge, "Hey, what are you doing in my home?" Blah blah blah. And then one of the things that makes the least sense out of everything, once you stop and think about it, is this guy was a trained assassin, and he can't beat up Sherlock. It hurts me to think about the fact that like Sherlock is afraid to fight Mary. He's actually said like she is dangerous, but he's like, no, I'm gonna go fight this dude and it's gonna be totally fine. I'm gonna go by myself.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm not gonna take backup, just me.
I mean, granted, at that point he didn't know, so everything I just said is irrelevant. But still, he knows that this guy has killed someone because the last two busts, some dude has like his throat slit, right? Mm-hmm. So he knows that this guy is a killer, and he went after him by himself, which is a very Sherlock thing to do. But at the same time, like this dude should have won. I guess the problem is the way that they played the scene, the fight choreography. They should have had him handedly beat Sherlock, like without issue. Then he breaks open the bust, he pulls out the memory stick, and Sherlock goes, "What is that? I thought she destroyed that." And then everything else plays out exactly like it did. Yep. And now we have him being a much more terrifying villain because we've seen how competent he is, but it showed us the opposite. It actually showed us him being an incompetent villain that we don't need to be scared of.
There's also yes, because I think you're right. If he'd absolutely duked, like completely cleaned up Sherlock could have done something clever to like incapacitate him. Like that's what we want Sherlock to be doing. Like you want the Robert Downey Jr. version where it's like such a non-contest because he's so smart. This just felt like two guys kind of trying to hit each other. Like it didn't feel like this uber smart detective who has studied martial arts or this like, you know, honed killer. It just, the choreography doesn't work here.
Yeah, and part of the overall theme, which they didn't establish it super well, but part of the overall theme was supposed to be Sherlock is overconfident and it got one of his friends killed. You know, yes. So they could have started to establish that right here in this scene where he just gets utterly decimated and then he still thinks, oh, everything is going to be fine. I am super in control. I'm Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. So for him to lose twice in the same episode could have been like a really good moment of characterization for him going into the next episode, where he's like got this level of humility that we've never seen from him before. But
Characters can't change in this show, Darth. This is a Stephen Moffat television program. No one can change. Stasis forever. Until off screen you change. So, okay, we get the Agra thumb drive. Sherlock arranges to meet Mary in a location, some kind of crypt or something. I don't know, man. And Sherlock's like, hey, what's going on? Mary explains that her and her colleagues were members of a freelance task force named Agra, derived from the members' names, Mary being R for Rosamund, A for AJ. And all members have a memory stick containing data on each of them, so basically like mutually assured destruction. She then explains the failed rescue mission to the British Embassy in Tbilisi, where the coup d'etat kind of happens, set off by the code word ammo, resulting in the embassy members dying and Mary fleeing. AJ gets captured while Mary escapes. Mary knocks out Sherlock with a drugged letter and then flees across the world following a seemingly random path. Very quickly, Sherlock and John find her because Sherlock put a tracker in the memory stick. However, AJ has also followed Sherlock and John. So if I'm going to start like a super secret covert assassination squad, I'm probably not going to like name it after our names, probably. I probably wouldn't put my initials in the name of the thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I probably would go with some, like, maybe a code name that you couldn't use to trace directly back to me might be a thing that you might consider. As far as sort of covert spy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of problems with that plan, because like it's the idea of them all being freelancers, so they have to be able to trust each other. So each one has all this data about the other. That's fine, but having it on a physical device that could get lost or stolen while on a mission makes absolute zero sense. Like they are at a point they could set this up on a computer so that they have a kill code and they have to put in that kill code, and otherwise an email will be sent out, blah blah blah. So they don't need this physical stick. And then aside from that obvious point, like one of their 4-member team was captured, tortured, and killed. Where's his memory stick? Logically, they found it and they have it.
Which it's like, why would you carry it around? If you get captured, you're fucked. Like, I don't really understand the conceit there. Yeah. Can we talk about the fucking tracker? So okay. Mary comes home in Morocco to find Sherlock playing chess with a kid. And Sherlock explains that, like, you know, even the seemingly random roll of a die is you know, reducible to a series of, you know, calculable variables, blah, 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 blah. And then she's like, no, but really. And he's like, I just put a tracker in the fucking USB. You didn't have to write a Sherlock Holmes TV show. You could have written a show about any character, ever. You could have been like, this could have been a whole, a whole different show. It could have just been an original intellectual property. But Steve was like, no, I'm going to adapt Sherlock Holmes. The stories about solving mysteries, working through evidence, paying attention to clues. Those stories teach you to be more observant in your real life. They teach you real, tangible fucking skills. And the way that they resolve the key tension of this episode is Sherlock puts a tracker in a thumb drive and then is dumb enough to let the assassin follow him. What the fuck? This script should not have got through the writer's room with this inclusion. This is like appalling shit. This is like, someone should have said no to you, Gaddis. I don't know it's Moffat's job, I guess, or Amira or whatever, but like, someone should have sat down and gone, hey, do you think in our Sherlock TV show, we shouldn't have him track someone through a thumb drive and then get tailed by an assassin? It's probably something I would have cut from my script about Sherlock fucking Holmes. What happened?
I'm just imagining.
What happened?
I'm just imagining in the writer's room that everyone has a mirror sitting in front of them, and they're like yelling at themselves, "Do not do this!"
I just on the day of shooting, when Benedict Cumberbatch said in a room with Martin Freeman, who was currently in the Hobbit films, when Benedict Cumberbatch said, "I put a tracker in the USB stick," someone should have said something. Someone should have said something. The guy holding the camera should have been like, "Guys, is this a good idea? What is happening in the BBC? This is proof.
Right.
This is proof that you shouldn't let Stephen Moffat's ex-wife be an executive producer on the show that he's running. Someone should have said something, Darth." Oh,
All right, let me play the contrarian for a minute, and let's talk about episode 1. Because it's the same thing where they had the tracker in the phone that was the clue to the solve. So the technology being used as part of the solve has been used before in Sherlock, and you didn't have as big of an issue with it then as now.
Well,
but it's still the same thing.
Because the phone was the fucking mystery. Where's the phone? That was the whole mystery. That was the unsolved piece of the puzzle. That was the thrust. It was the pink phone. It was the thrust of the story.
So it wouldn't necessarily be the tracker itself that is the problem. Like, if Sherlock Holmes wanted to use a tracker to go after someone, you wouldn't necessarily have a problem with him using the technology. It was just the way that they chose to have him use the technology.
It's the way that the technology resolves the only tension in this episode. The tension in this episode is what's going to happen to Mary. Is her past going to have consequences, right? We get that Samaran story setting up this idea of, like, you can't escape your fate. You can't run from your fate. Mary is running from her fate for all of, like, 10 minutes of screen time. And then Sherlock finds her with a tracker. If they wanted this to be the way that he finds her, this needed to be the climax of the episode. Because it pays off the fact that it doesn't matter how smart you think you are. Because one of the themes of this episode is, like, arrogance and thinking that you can escape your past if you're smart enough or whatever. It would be a great resolution to the story for Mary to not have thought to check the thumb drive for a tracker, and that's what causes AJ to find her. That's what causes everything to go wrong. But instead, the way that this pays off is, I'm trying to verbalize, I guess, my thought process and why this made me so fucking... Why I think this is just such a poor idea. Because you have her flee. She's fleeing for like 10 minutes of screen time. They find her. It's done that Sherlock gets tracked by AJ, but whatever. So Sherlock and John undermine the thing that Mary's going for. They find her by putting a tracker in the thumb drive, which is so rudimentary that she should have thought to check. And then they have a standoff, and AJ gets killed by somebody else that isn't related to the case. They resolve this loose end in the most coincidental way possible. There's no consequences for anybody here. AJ just gets killed. And so we don't even get, like, an emotional payoff to her fleeing and AJ catching up to them. He just gets killed by a police officer who randomly steps in and shoots him. And so it undercuts what they were going for with Mary. It makes Sherlock and John look like idiots. And then there's no ramifications for this decision that they made. They just get to go back to London. And so, yeah.
And like I had said it earlier that I loved the travel sequence that did with her, like all of this spy stuff, and she, like, knocks out the I was gonna say hostess, the lady on the airplane.
Yeah, the
She's
flight
not
attendant.
A waitress either, the flight attendant.
Yeah. The waitress. You know, the plane waitress? What do you call them?
So, yeah, she knocks her out and swaps clothes, and then she's got all of these different disguises. Like, I loved the spy stuff that was going on there, but then it's like you were saying, like, one reason that reveal is so frustrating is because it undermines all of that awesome stuff that she did. She took all of these great pains and did it so well, and we're, like, impressed with her, and she looks really competent.
Yeah.
And then, Sherlock snaps his fingers, and he's like, "Oh no, you're not that great. I was able to just, track you with my phone."
Yeah.
So that's probably one reason you had such an issue with it. And then The other thing just might be of how like stupid the execution was for the entire travel thing altogether, because the entire sequence in itself doesn't make any sense, and then the way that Sherlock finds them not making sense on top of the whole scene not making sense may have just completely broken everything for you. But I'm like, the entire purpose of her running was to draw AJ away from her wife, from her husband and child.
Mm-hmm.
She ran away in a random manner in such a way that she thought Sherlock Holmes could not follow her, yet she expected AJ to be able to follow her.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
It makes no sense. It makes like negative sense.
This is what I'm saying. Like, there's everything about this plays out wrong, and it's no one particular part of this story's fault. It's the whole apparatus that fails that fails here. Like, it's not one. I think sometimes one thing we can point to and be like, oh, yeah, that's obviously the issue. It's all of it. Like the surrounding material, the execution, the logic, the coincidences, the protagonists, the antagonists. Like, everything here fails. The way the scene resolves doesn't make any sense. Also, like, during the shootout, AJ just gives them the fact that Ammo and the English woman. He just gives them the exposition that Sherlock needs to solve it later. What? I don't understand. You simply rewrite this scene so that there's three of them. They outsmart AJ and then get the information out of him, and Sherlock gets this. Sherlock and Mary interrogate him or do something to get this information out of him, and then at the last minute he does something, and Mary's forced to kill him or something like that. Like, you do it. This scene exists in every fucking spy movie ever, but here he just kind of yells it at them while they're doing a firefight. Yeah, and then to have just a random police officer step in and shoot him is baffling.
Which is it's weird, like how I think one reason that we're so frustrated by all of this stuff is because the potential was so it was so amazing. Like, I would have watched an entire hour-and-a-half episode of Mary doing spy stuff.
Oh my god!
Because
yes.
it had potential there. So the fact that they went with this story and then just utterly ruined it,
it's bizarre.
Just makes it makes it so frustrating.
Well, it's the same problem we've talked about, which is it implies a much more interesting story than we watch. Like, a whole episode of Mary going around the world doing spy shit, and then Sherlock and John trying to follow her. That'd be fascinating to watch. But instead, we get that story implied, and then the thing that we watch is this, like, messy, weird, montagey, hard to follow story, I guess. Like, yeah, it's just unfortunate. The
writers also do not want to give her a leg up over Sherlock at any point. Like, they have to have her come back so he could protect her. Like, even though they've constantly had, like, him say stuff like, oh, we're fine, we have Mary with us, she'll protect us. Like, he'll say, like, dialogue like that, but then in practice, he's like, no, I have to protect you, and we have to do it back in my hometown.
That's actually something that I don't really understand conceptually, is, like, how... He's like, I'll protect you, but what does that mean? Like... I don't understand what that means in practice. Because Sherlock Holmes isn't, like, a physical force necessarily to be trifled with, but, like, what does protect mean? I don't really understand what he means at all by that. Like, in practice, I'm not sure what that looks like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because the question is, how do I protect you from an assassin who will shoot you with a sniper rifle from 2 miles away, or who will poison you with food that was delivered a month ago and you had forgotten was in the cupboard?
Yeah,
you're like, that's why, like, at first I was like, what do you mean protect? He means, like, I will not let them kill you. But then conceptually, it's like, that means a whole lot of stuff, and how are you going to do that?
I think it'd be different if I guess we've seen him be, dangerous or whatever physically, but it's not like, I don't know. A contrast would be, like, there's a really good Dresden Files novel where he, the entire novel is he's basically, like, takes up a job to protect like a queen of the Fae or something like that. And it's just like Dresden and this woman going through Chicago, trying not to get murdered. They just have to survive the night. But it's a great story because Dresden's a fucking wizard and he's got magic and he can do different spells and he has limitations and you watch it and it plays out brilliantly. But here I'm like, I don't... yeah, I'm not conceptually sure what protect me, and maybe it's just the choice of language. Like if they had used maybe some different terminology, like, you know, I'll catch the killer, or I'll you know, I don't know. And then, you know, what ends up happening is he says, I'll protect you, you know, but back in London, some other guy kills the person he's promised to protect her from, and then they just go home. You know, it doesn't really make a lot of... yeah. Doesn't make any sense, like the rest of this fucking episode. Okay, let's talk about Sherlock and Mycroft, and then we'll take a quick break and then talk about the ending of this episode.
One cool thing we skipped over was when she knocks him out, she has sleeping powder inside a note, so when he opens the note to read the note, then he automatically just falls asleep after he breathes the powder that she's able to breathe but not fall asleep. That hurt me to watch that.
I purged
scene.
that from my brain, yeah.
But aside from that, while he's in this passed out state, you get another little Redbeard foreshadowing where you actually see the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hint, hint, something's coming. Yeah, interesting. So later, Sherlock calls Mycroft and explains that ammo is really amo, the Latin word for I love, and Lady Smallwood's codename is Love. And so Mycroft interrogates her, but she swears she has no idea. No idea, not guilty. Why would I do that? We've been friends forever. It's a pretty simple scene. I really, really want to talk about the stuff that happens right after this because I think I want to know your thoughts on the stuff that they do with John. But I guess this Lady Smallwood thing, we've seen her enough in the previous episode that I like what this show's instinct is here, which is let's keep the same players in the show as much as possible, characters that we know. I think that's a really, really good instinct. We're not meeting new people. We're sort of going like, oh yeah, let's spend more time with her, which I thought was I think that's just a really smart choice, and something that I could see different shows going a different direction with this episode. I quite like that they keep it contained.
Which might be fairly common for decent writers, because like my first thought was Big Bang Theory. When they want to bring in some like other characters, bring in some more comedic relief, they'll bring in Zach, I think was his name, who dated Penny for a while, but he's just like the biggest lovable stupid idiot that you've ever met, but he'll constantly cycle in and out for a few episodes, and then you'll never see him again for 18 episodes, and then you'll see him again.
Yeah.
And they'll do that with a few characters where you won't see them. In a Community, Ian Duncan is like gone for like entire season, and then he's back for a few episodes, and then you don't see him again, and then he's back, and then they'll even call attention to it during the dialogue. But that's probably a cue of good writers, is you don't want to constantly introduce new people just for a short scene. Even though it might work, but then the audience is thinking, who was that when they go out? Because like even the background characters in Community tend to be the same background characters all of the time, and I feel ashamed for not knowing their names, but it's the same. Yeah. Like Vicky is one of them. And they have names, they have some dialogue. Yeah. You should know who they are, you should recognize them, and then your brain isn't thinking to itself, who was that and what's their story, instead of focusing on the big picture. Yeah, you get like a cast of characters who you get to watch over time change, and you kind of get to see what they're up to. One of the things, and it's because obviously he's friends with Harmon, but like Starburns is a great character who starts off as just like a background joke and then ends up being like kind of a central, like a load-bearing plot character. Same with Neil or like Todd or characters like that, where they just get to do like interesting stuff with these side characters because they've developed them enough. I want to talk about Todd so much. That poor man.
poor man. But yeah, like, you get that final scene with what's it? Is it Gareth? No, is that the guy's name? Not Gareth. He marries. Do you know the incest episode? Where he marries his cousin.
The glasses guy who talks like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is Gareth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah, but like, you don't get to do that in a different show because you haven't spent 6 seasons with the same cast of characters being developed. And that's just really like clever, I guess. And gives you a lot of latitude with the kinds of stories you can tell. We're just praising Community, but that's the only relief we have in this episode. One of the better like manipulations of that technique is like Other Annie, right? Annie Kim, who starts off as like a one-note character and then just is continually in the background of other plots in a way that's really cool. Community does like a brilliant job of it. You get the board, like the school board, who come in and out of the show as well. There's just a lot of really clever use of background characters that get developed and reused. Rick and Morty's obviously extremely good at that as well. One of their neighbors in that show is constantly like trying to get like say hi to the family, and everyone hates him, and it's just a fun gag. But then you get to like over time realize the relationship between him and this family. It's great. Like it's a real, I think, marker of, as you say, trying to keep your cast of characters as limited as possible without making the world feel small. And that's a real hard balancing act, I think, for a lot of writers. And when it's done well, like it is periodically in this show, it's great. I think sometimes, which we're going to see in the next 2 episodes, the world of Sherlock can be made very small accidentally by the use of this in inappropriate moments, where everything is about the same 4 people. And that can be a problem. And, I think it's really symptomatic of a challenge that Moffat has in his style and his aesthetic. Think about Doctor Who and the fact that, like, he spends 3 seasons developing this mystery of the Silence that are this religious order that are built up specifically to stop the Doctor or to kill the Doctor or something. And then he gets to the final episode and he has to do the payoff, and it's Matt Smith's final episode. And it's like, okay, we're finally going to find out how all this works and what it means. And then it's like, oh no, the Silence is just like an army that he has to defend a planet called Christmas. And you're like, what the fuck did you just say? So, oh yeah, it's just an army to defend a planet called Christmas. And it's like, what are you fucking what? And then it's like, oh, well, what are the cracks in the skin of the universe that he's been checking? Don't worry about that. We closed them in season 6, but then I wouldn't worry about it too much. But then we don't. The Silence is related to that and the name of the Doctor, but we're not gonna resolve that either. But just it's a planet called Christmas, and he's got an army, and it's like, what did you forget how to write a show? And this to me feels symptomatic of that, where that entire exercise has the accidental consequence of making every episode of Matt Smith's Doctor Who feel very small in a way that it doesn't want to, and undercuts the whole point of what makes that show great, which is these individual stories that kind of show us characters growing and evolving over time, and then you get these cool like one-shot big movie ideas that are in these small kind of television episodes, and it undercuts all that by tying it all together and then absolutely fumbling the ending. Contrasted with, I guess, the end of Capaldi's Doctor, which is like they forgot they had to have a arc for the character, so they have to like try and finish it, and it's bad. I'm just ripping on Moffat now. It's an annoying habit. But I guess I'm trying to illustrate, like, this is something he does. He gets really close to nailing it with bringing these characters back and moving them in and out of the story. But then he has this instinct, which is like, but everything has to be about them. And he can't quite be chill about it in a way that lets it work. He sort of always overreaches and holds on too tight, which is unfortunate. Okay, so let's take a break.
So
Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, this was all leading up into the talk about the whole cheating thing with John. So Yeah, let's break before we delve into
Yeah,
that
'cause I
horrendous topic. And
Yeah, really want to know your thoughts on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I might need to get a shot of something stronger.
Look, it's 10:30 in the morning, but I might also need that. Good grief! All right, we'll be right back to talk about one of the biggest decisions this show has made so far about what it's about. And we'll talk about that when we get back, and we'll find out Darth's thoughts on what they're doing with John here. So we'll be back in a sec. This season of Give Up After 3 is brought to you by the book of the same name, Give Up After 3, a historical analysis of Sherlock's lost final episode, where I take all the research we've done from the show across the seasons and all of the learnings and findings and condense that into a full academic book. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but it also has a lot of the more interesting things we discovered and worked through. So if you want a way to support the show and also get something really interesting, you can find that at zeroindent.com/store. That's zeroindent.com/store. Making a coffee in this jacket was like Mission Impossible. It was like the most stressful thing ever. It was like had it like I was like doing the grinds like this far out, being like, don't.
Yeah, whenever I rarely have to get dressed up like that, I generally refuse to be around food before I go out to whatever social gathering is requiring the get up.
100%. It's just too risky. I put a little bit of Bailey's in my coffee, just to prepare for this moment. So I've got a little bit of Irish coffee happening over here. Okay. So the sequencing here is a bit confusing, but basically Sherlock pieces together the final part of the puzzle when he recalls Mary explaining the great thing about underlings bringing information, but still being under everyone's noses. On the flight back, what happens is on the flight back, we get a montage with John. I want to explain what happens afterwards so we have a full context, and then we can talk about montage. So Sherlock realizes, like, oh yeah, Mary's thing about underlings. He then tells Mary and John to meet him at the London Aquarium, where he meets Vivian Norbury, who reveals she tipped off the terrorists so that the hostages and Agra could be eliminated. On the plane, so we get a flash back to a conversation that John and Mary are having about trust. It's like 2 or 3 words. And then we cut back to a montage of John meets a woman on the bus earlier in the episode. And then we think that, he smiled at her or whatever. We then get a flashback to that moment where he bumps into a woman on the bus, and then he gets off the bus, and then she gives him her number. Then he texts her a few times, and then it's implied they've been texting for a while, when John then basically breaks it off and is like, hey, I'm not free. We shouldn't do this. So I've just written down, how does Darth feel about this being the biggest fan of John? What does this mean?
So this entire, I don't even want to call it a subplot, because it was like a half-hearted attempted one, because it didn't actually go anywhere and it didn't serve any actual purpose that we see. But it was like just there to fill up time or something. I don't understand why it's in here. It does, we do not see any indication that he and Mary are having any marital difficulties whatsoever. They still seem to have a fantastic relationship with each other. They're still, like every couple, they're having issues with the child who won't sleep, but there is nothing abnormal about any of the interactions that I've seen there. And both of my nephews are still under the age of 5, so they have been through that stage of me hearing all about the crying and won't sleep at night and all of this stuff, and I'm like, everything in there is normal. They haven't dealt with anything that every parent hasn't dealt with,
Mm-hmm.
So and then we get the not at least one, which you already said, if not another scene where it's very brief, but Mary talks about how good John is. She's like, you're the best man, you're the best father. I couldn't have asked for anyone better. You're the best person. And then immediately it cuts to him, at least in text, cheating on her. And
Yes.
again, I don't understand what the point is, unless they are just trying to put in drama for no other reason than to have drama because it felt like it was too stagnant. So I don't understand, which again, I'd said this before, I don't understand Mary's character motivation for multiple things that she did. We've said this other times, but why are they doing this? Why is he doing it? I love everything about how they did it. Like the way that they did the meet cute felt so natural, and it just, everything flowed. The way that he like flirted without flirting just was it was like really wholesome in a weird way. Like if he was single, everything would have felt like wonderful about it, you know? Like having the little flower in his hair that he didn't know about, like all of it was like really cute. You know, it could have been like a really good scene for a couple getting together, but like it being in here the way that it's in here doesn't make sense because we don't understand the motivation for him wanting to do this. Like,
Yes.
Mary should have been at this point, AJ should have still been after her. She should have been like, there should have been drama with them because she is like yelling at him and trying to get him to go away and leave her alone or something like that so she could deal with it. There should have been some kind of drama involved that would emotionally make him even consider cheating. Which is like another interesting thought is one thing that I had heard a while back was the like statistically what makes men and women cheat are very different. With women, it's an emotional distance from your partner that makes you want to cheat because you don't feel emotionally connected. With men, it's a physical distance from your partner, and we never actually see that. Like they're always together. He's not physically separate from her. He would not have that feeling of loneliness that would want him to go out and cheat. So I hate the entire thing, not just because I'm a fan of John and I don't think that he would ever approach this, which in the end he didn't. He pulls himself back and says, even though it's just been texting, he says, this isn't a good thing. We're not going to go any further. So yes, I don't like it from that aspect because at the beginning, I would have said John, at the beginning of this entire series, I would have said John should never even get to that point. He should have like never taken her phone number, or at the very least thrown it away, because we see him try to throw it away in the trash can, and then he thinks about it and puts it in his pocket. At that point, if he had thrown it away in the trash can, it's perfectly fine. But it's like weird to say that I could be okay with the idea of him cheating if his character was built up to where it made sense for him to cheat. So the biggest problem that I have is not like morally him doing it, but that the story didn't build. Yeah, the story had to build up his immoral action, and it didn't.
I mean, I know why this is here plot-wise. Do you remember how this gets revealed later? Of who the woman is?
I don't remember. Yes, but I don't remember why. Like, I don't remember what the purpose was for her doing this.
There wasn't one, because that last episode makes no sense. But that's, to my mind, this feels like Moffat and Gaddis being like, we have a plan for the end of this season. We need to shoehorn in an interaction with this character so that we can have a big reveal later. Like, this to me feels like really forced kind of, not foreshadowing is the wrong word, but it feels like forced setup for a later payoff, but the setup doesn't feel justified within the episode it's in. It's the only way I can like, if I tune my brain into like the Dunsu thinks he's smart wavelength, which is where Moffat and Gaddis tend to plot from, it's smart because it adds a little bit of tension to the episode, and you don't think, oh, who is this? You just think it's some woman. And then later, when you get the reveal of who it is, it's smart because you wouldn't have thought to look in that place for her, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it kind of has that kind of what I was alluding to before with the silence payoff, where it kind of feels like adding another layer for the sake of trying to do like a magic trick at the end, but it doesn't work within the context of what it's housed in.
Now, what I would have liked to have seen that would have solved everything, I think, is for her to have been John's therapist from the very beginning of episode 1. So that we have constantly seen this woman in multiple episodes, and this interaction with him on the bus would be the first time that they have met outside of a professional environment where she could theoretically flirt with him without it being like a whole legal professional issue. So if they wanted to go with that route, they could have done that thing like you said where they wanted to introduce her, they wanted to get her, they wanted to have this big reveal, and it would have been a much bigger reveal to be able to say that she's been there from episode 1, and it makes more sense because as the therapist, she would have had more interaction with John in a more deep level where she could find out more about Sherlock.
Yeah, but that would require them they would have had to have planned this the whole time. Like the fact that John's therapist is not... This is really hard to talk about without spoiling it. The fact that John's therapist is the character that Sherlock goes to see at the end of this episode, that's John's current therapist. He swaps therapists in the next episode. And so you're right. I think if they planted this earlier and then we had that reveal, that would have been really interesting. This character that's been there the whole time, which they could have done. I don't know why they didn't just keep the same therapist. It would have been fine. Seemed unnecessary to add this twist. She could have just been adopted. Yeah. It's really easy. Would have been very, very simple. But no, they had to go down the route of like... Yeah, anyway. Of changing it for a contrivance next episode. So I tend to agree with you, I think, on multiple levels. I think it doesn't really make sense for why John is doing this. I mean, we're also talking about this stuff as if people cheat on their spouses for reasons that are tangible or like related to that relationship. Like it's not lost on me that like the motivation for this stuff can vary. But we need to know for John's character, like you were saying, whatever the reason, we need to feel that reason be prescient and feel him, the turmoil of that reason leading him to do this. Instead of what could have happened, which again, if this was going to be an interesting episode to watch, we could have seen that tension throughout the episode. Instead of having it as a montage, have it as these little side beats throughout the story, right? Put it in the places where it's happening. And then you'd have the tension of the plot weighing against this distraction or this potential infidelity. And then it's really easy, well, not easier to swallow, but then it makes sense. It's like there's a lot of pressure. There are these assassins and his life is really complicated and his wife keeps lying to him. And then there's this respite in this texting relationship, whatever you want to call it, this emotional affair. And if you'd woven it throughout the episode, I think you get a lot more mileage for the specific content that you're putting in place. Instead, like everything in this episode, we just get it communicated through flashback and montage, which I find very confusing. I guess the show really does this a lot, and I don't know why it insists on it, other than a lack of focus. It seems like results in these kind of montages, but yeah, I don't like it. I don't think it's well done. The special effects are good, like the way that the text like appears on screen is kind of clever, but beyond that, I don't really. I would cut this entirely. I don't think it adds anything. It doesn't really play into her death at all. It is literally just a setup for a payoff in a later episode. One thing
I do really like, and I don't know if this is reading too much into it, but once you find out who the woman is, and then then you realize that this entire scene, like, this isn't her naturally. Every motion she did, every flicker of her eyes, every twitch of her mouth was a calculated decision to invoke a reaction in John. And when you look at it from that way, it's absolutely fascinating for me to think that in the story, every movement of her hand when she adjusted the shawl, it was on purpose. And I'm like, what did that invoke in John? When she does this to the shawl, or when she, every little motion theoretically meant something, and that's fascinating. But something else that's really interesting is that if they had done, if they had rewritten this same thing and had Sherlock and Mary going off doing spying stuff, trying to, drag AJ away from the kid. John is there watching the kid, and he's, fighting with himself about doing this whole cheating thing. At the same time that they are, his wife and best friend are literally fighting for their lives. And the juxtaposition of those two things could have been really fascinating for something that doesn't really matter versus literal life and death to protect the people that are potentially cheating on you. Like, those two things could have been fascinating if they had woven them together really, really carefully. But these people don't do that, so...
Once again, we describe a much more interesting version of the show than exists. Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be quite interesting, like rhyming and echoing, right? You'd have, as you say, Sherlock and Mary fighting for their lives, and then John fighting to try and retain his actual domestic life, right? Like, that's a really interesting push and pull.
And it's also interesting to note that, and I may be reading this completely the wrong way, but the way that I read it is that John is not being loyal to Mary. He is doing the right thing because he wants to be noble, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't feel to me like he is not saying, I love my wife so much I'm not going to cheat on her. He's saying, I'm not free. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be like, it's a selfish decision. It's not for the love of the wife, if that makes sense. And I don't know if I'm reading that the wrong way.
I think the show certainly thinks that, right? Because they keep saying John's a good man. John's a good man. It's not that John's a loving husband. It's that he's a good, noble person. It's not that John's a good friend. It's that he always does the right thing. And those sometimes would be the same thing, but they're not always. Doing something for a friend could be doing something ethically wrong, but you do it because you love them. John always makes the morally correct decision from, I guess, like a utilitarian perspective, right? He does the least amount of harm to the world. That's his entire ethos. So I mean, I tend to read it the same way. I didn't read that as, I can't do this. I'm in love. It's like, no, this is like ethically wrong, and I always make the right choice. I just don't like. It doesn't add anything to Mary's death. It doesn't change John's relationship to anyone. It just kind of happens and goes away, and is used as ammunition later to prove a point. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm more interested to come back to this after we get to the final episode and discuss it more, because potentially this could all play out fantastic in the last episode and harken back to this, and it could mean something amazing.
It's true. People who haven't seen the show are like, what the fuck are they talking about? Okay. Sherlock meets Vivian Norbury in the aquarium, and she reveals that she tipped off the terrorists. Her motive was to kill the British ambassador, who worked out that Vivian was selling secrets, basically doing treason to achieve a quiet life. The police and Mary arrive, and Vivian pulls out a gun. We get an exchange where Sherlock starts to do his, like, super special, I'm gonna cold read you and bait you into making a mistake type moment. And Mary's like, Sherlock, stop. Like, she can tell this is going to go wrong. Vivian fires at Sherlock to try and surprise him, because he kind of goads her, and he's like, you tricked everybody, you tricked the British government, but you couldn't trick Sherlock Holmes. You can't surprise me. And she's like, well, how about this? And she shoots him. And Mary jumps in front of the bullet, and we then get John arriving, who tells Mary of, holds her in her arms, and Mary tells him how she loved being Mary Watson, and she then dies with Mycroft, Sherlock, and Lestrade kind of watching on in kind of muted horror, and we get sort of John, just this like guttural, like he's just, yeah, he is not dealing with this well in this moment, and it's very well acted, I think.
So I have a really interesting read that sounds like it's going to be very different from yours.
Oh, okay.
I think Sherlock was not doing his normal thing. I think that he was trying to take the bullet. Because to start off, Vivian was pointing the gun at Mary until Sherlock started doing his thing and started pissing her off. Then Vivian was mad at him. She turns and points the gun at him. So I think that he was literally trying to save Mary's life. And then Mary was like, no, I ain't doing that. I ain't letting you die. And then she jumps in front and saves him.
Right.
And I think Vivian knew that she was going to do that. I think she intentionally... Like, if she shot Mary, Sherlock would have jumped in front, but if she shot Sherlock, Mary would have jumped in front, and she knew the way to hurt Sherlock the most was to kill Mary. So I think she did that on purpose, because she says, Vivian says, okay, so first Lestrade says, be reasonable, and she says, no, I don't think so. And she says it in the most beautiful accent. It's one of my favorite deliveries of the entire episode. Like, it's just so matter of fact, like this old grandma just saying, no, I'm going to shoot you. And then she shoots him. Yeah. And she reacts with no surprise whatsoever when Mary jumps in front. Therefore, I think you have to read it as she knew Mary would jump in front. So the entire thing turns into this big calculated, like everything they said was a chess move to shoot someone or save someone. I don't know how much the writers planned that, but if you read what's there, I think you have to assume it's what I just described.
I don't disagree, but why does that matter?
Overall,
because, like, what's her motivation there? Like, why does she shoot anyone at all? Like, her whole gig is up now. Like, the jig is up. Like, eliminating Agra doesn't serve a purpose now because everyone knows that it was her. Like, this isn't like, do you know what I mean? Like,
I think the reason for shooting was just a final act of revenge, because she already knows she's going to jail forever, so it doesn't matter. And it was coming down to who does she want to shoot, who is she most angry at, and she's only ever really dealt with the two of them before. I mean, I guess she could have like shocked everyone and shot Mycroft instead, which would have
that would have been crazy.
Yeah. It's like, you've always been kind of a jerk.
Yeah, you've always been kind of a dick. Boom. You're a weird praying mantis, man. Bang.
But yeah, so the, like, and maybe I'm just making that more interesting than it was, but I was just fascinated by, like, the idea of why she chose who she shot, and then Sherlock saying the things he was saying on purpose, and then Mary not letting him get away with it, and then choosing to die in anyway. Which, you know, from her later thing when she gives the video to Sherlock, like, she knew that it was going to break John if she died, yet she chose to do it anyway. So there's so many things that, like, on the surface they don't make sense, but then if you look at it deeper, it's like she'd sacrificed herself for that friendship because she thinks that friendship was more beautiful than her marriage. And that could be really a beautiful idea, or that could be really stupid. I'm not really sure which.
I think it's pretty dumb, dog.
Like she is.
I think it's pretty dumb.
I
think it's pretty dumb.
I mean, it is really dumb on one hand, but then on the other hand, she is saying that I am going to die eventually because I lived this past life, and that's pretty much what her video says to Sherlock, is like, eventually this life will catch up to me and I will be killed. So I'm trying to do the best thing I can, and I want to do this to save your best friend because you need this relationship with him. Like, there's so many ways that you could read this where it's not as stupid as it looks on the surface, because there are just so many problems with this scene, like, on the surface. Then
But you're starting to do the thing. You're starting to
I'm doing
do the thing that the fans do, where they're like, "There's no way it could be this dumb." I think it's just this dumb. Also, so here's the thing. Here's the thing that's really frustrating about this scene. Sherlock has survived being shot before by Mary, who was standing next to him. Surely both of these people are capable of taking a bullet in a way that wouldn't kill them. We've seen it happen. We know it's possible. Understanding that Mary's not the one holding the gun, this seems like something that should be feasible. So the show has this problem where it'll do bullshit stunts like that in a previous season and have Sherlock survive a gunshot. And then in this one other context, that's not a possible option. And so when I talk about aesthetic clashing against the story that they're trying to tell, this sequence for me is like a distillation of that problem, where if we read it the way that you have, which I think is a valid reading, it is interesting, yes. But they've set up the possibility that this needn't kill you. They set that up in the story already for a stunt previously involving both of these characters, who then neither of the characters involved in this either, it's not an option in this moment for whatever reason, or they don't. I don't think it's a sufficiently interesting resolution to this scene for one of them to get shot. I think you have so many other options that are really interesting with how you deal with this moment. And to I've said this before, to finally write a really interesting female character on screen in a Moffat-told story, and then kill her to save Sherlock in a moment where, like, the character shooting the gun didn't really have a clear motivation for pulling the trigger. I get what you're saying, which is revenge or whatever, but, like, that's not really a reason necessarily. Like, that doesn't feel compelling enough to justify the change in the story. Like, this completely changes what's possible in the narrative for, like, this secretary, this receptionist was just, like, trying to, save up enough money to have a quiet life, and, her betrayal of the ambassador is sort of what precipitated all of this. That doesn't feel significant in that, like, Mary's death here isn't because she did something wrong in her past life. Her death is because this receptionist didn't tidy up all the loose ends. It's not like Mary was tricked into doing a war crime or something, and then this is her comeuppance or her kind of just desserts. Like, the dramatic thrust of this just doesn't come together for me, because there's no, like, the apparatus around it aren't driven enough toward the outcome that when it happens, I'm like, okay, I guess, instead of what should be happening, which is, like, when it all happens, I'm like, oh, like, something bad was bound to happen, because look at how things were wrong from the start, and this was only a matter of time. I don't feel that sense of, like, impending dread for this scenario, because we've seen these characters get out of worse situations before, and Mary didn't do anything wrong enough to start with that you feel like this is kind of an inevitable conclusion. We just get told it is because we have the Samaran parable. So that's kind of, for me, why it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I had said it at the beginning that parable didn't play out, because they say it again at the end, and like the Vivian starts to say the same story, and it doesn't fit with what's happening, although they're trying to just shoehorn it in because they really like that story. And you had also repeated what I said at the very beginning, that I don't think that the story that they gave us was worth all of the damage that it does to the characters and to the story going forward. Because, like, after this, there's another 10 minutes of screen time in the episode, and unless I utterly missed something, we do not see John again after this. Like, it's a conscious decision of the writers to not put him on screen because he's avoiding Sherlock, and we see that as the audience as well, as we don't get to see John anymore because now he's broken.
Yep.
And it's just like my note here was that I am vehemently mad that they killed Mary off. Like, I do not understand the decision. They don't have a good enough reason. I don't know that they have any reason to kill her off. Unless they just...
I think I think that they remove her from the board because they need an excuse to have the men in the story alone by the start of the last episode. Because that's the only, like... because you can't have that final episode play out the way it does if Mary is involved. Because then you have to either have her as a damsel in distress or part of that action, and that becomes a much more complicated concept to put to paper, I guess. Like, this feels to me like they've decided how the show is going to end. I mean, we've been alluding to it, but you see all this, the Redbeard stuff is getting alluded to pretty heavily now. They've decided how it's going to end. Mary is too smart and complex for the way that is going to play out, so we need to get her off the board. That's sort of how this reads to me. Which is not a good enough reason for how this plays out, to my mind.
Yeah, she still could have stayed in because, like, Mycroft is I don't remember what the term is. Like, he's the wizard or whatever the archetype is that, like, knows what's going on, and then Sherlock is the one who is, like, learning and going through the paces of figuring out what's going on, and she could have been like the wild card that is off doing her own thing as part of the entire story.
Yep.
And is dangerous enough to hamper what the villain is trying to do. So it could have been really interesting. I'm interested to watch that episode with the thought, if Mary were alive, what would she be doing right now? That could be a really interesting exercise to see, you know, if you were a better writer, could you have worked her into this story? Or, I mean, I've never looked into it. Sometimes these things happen literally just because the actor wants out for one reason or another. And that very well could have been, and they had to, sometimes they'll have to come up with a really rush death scene that doesn't quite work. I'm very interested to see how they do Wakanda Forever, how they work that in. Because if they don't do it right, it could end up really, really bad if they don't handle, you know, that death sequence properly. So anyway, one thing I wanted to jump back to that I just thought was really weird was figuring out, I don't understand how the secretary betrayed Agra. Like, the explanation that they gave makes so little sense to me that I'm still thinking about it and trying to understand it, because the explanation that she gives is that she told the villains, the kidnappers, she told them the code word love. And because they knew the code word love, they were able to kill Agra.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not like they already knew that they had the ambassador. Like, it doesn't...
Yeah.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea how telling the terrorists that code word changed anything.
I mean, you could make the argument that if she had called and told them, hey, there's this group of mercenaries, they're going to break in at 12 p.m., they will come through the skylight, and they will come through the east entrance, blah, blah. If she had given them exactly that stuff, then it would have made total sense. But the explanation that they gave was, I gave them the code word love, and then that got them all killed.
So I've read through a lot of Tumblr this week, and no one seems to have a compelling explanation for this. Like, this is one of those details that gets left out of fan theories, which is a really telling sign, because everything else in the show is like, oh, we can connect it to... People just avoid this part of this fact like a plague. They're like, this makes so little sense that people don't even try and work it in.
Yeah. I mean, you see that in Star Wars all the time, like the when diehard fans are like dissecting something, and then there's something that Lucas obviously like didn't care to put thought into, they'll completely sweep it under the rug and like not even try to talk about it. But like, that being said, like the big reveal for her betrayal and all of that aside, like, I loved her as a villain. Like, there's something about, and it may just be completely the actress and the method of speech that she had, and then the physicality not being intimidating, but she had this, like, the cold, dead way that she portrayed stuff was just fascinating to me. I really liked her as a villain.
She just chews the scenery, man. It's really good. I like it. I mean, obviously the comparison they're going for is like the shark, right? Like they use that visual imagery a lot here, and they sort of want her to feel similar, which is like this kind of the death that is inevitably coming for you, that is indifferent and cold and predatory.
Which is interesting.
I think
because I'm pretty sure they did the same exact comparison with Magnuson. Like, I'm pretty sure that Sherlock like said the words "dead eyes like a shark."
Yeah, but no, I think he describes him as a reptile or something. But yeah, he might even say, yeah, he's like a shark or something, which doesn't really come back at all. So I don't really know what that was about. Like, this just seems to be like a piece of imagery that I guess stuck in the writers' minds. No, I think she's great. I think the reveal and the fact that she was in the first scene is, I guess, technically good storytelling. It just, for me, all of the stuff that we talked about laid on top of this meant that, like, it didn't matter how good the performance was. I was not in the scene at all. Yeah.
I was way more in that scene than I was through most of the rest of the episode. So
yeah, same.
yeah, so like,
but that tells you how little I was in the rest of it. Yeah, probably.
I mean, that scene is much more memorable. So I'm until you get to the whole Mary dying thing, which just angers me. But then you have, like, you had briefly mentioned it, but the guttural noises that John makes when she dies, and then at first I was so, like, I hated their decision to not show his face when he's making these like guttural crying noises. And I'm like, this is terrible filmmaking. You're not showing the dude's face. You can't. And then he slowly looks up at the camera, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the most like terrifying look. And like, I couldn't decide if I wanted to break down in tears or run out of the room. Like,
it's so brilliant.
Loved that. Yeah. So I love the acting choices and the direction that they chose, because you know the DP could have easily decided to reshoot that and have him do it a different way. So I love the decisions that they made there.
Martin Freeman earns his paycheck in that moment. Like, I mean, if you've seen him in Fargo, like this, the kind of, he plays a brilliant straight man, up and down, who has this like broiling rage that he's capable of. He plays it so well. I also quite like the dramatic framing of all of the important men in Sherlock's life, watching him fail John and Mary. Like, they're kind of standing around watching the outcome of Sherlock failing. There's something thematically happening there that I quite like, where like, it's not necessarily Sherlock's arrogance that gets her killed or anything like that, but it's something interesting about them all having to bear witness to this complete failure of a thing he said he'd do. And it's like proof that Sherlock Holmes is not magic, right? Like, this is like, and they get to observe that, and it's the people that are closest to him who aren't Molly, obviously. Like, I just think that's really interesting. I'm not sure what it's doing, but I noted it down as noteworthy.
I'm going to throw something else confusing in here. And I might have to send you, I think maybe sending you a screenshot of this is the smartest way to show you, because telling you the exact frame that I'm looking at probably would be a little difficult. But the guys are all standing in a triangle around John, and then there's another triangle right there on the wall glowing beside them. And this imagery seems too on purpose to be accidental, but what are they what are they going for here?
I think they're setting up the maneuver that they pull in the final episode.
It's been too long since I watched it. Okay. We'll come back.
We'll talk about it when we get there. There's something about triples and triangles, and yeah, we'll get there. I think this is very, like, they're starting to key into some of the symbolism that they're going to stick with.
Okay. So,
you know,
I love that they are setting stuff up 2 episodes from now, like, subtly in the character positions, you know? So, like, they have to actually plan this.
Or it was an accident.
But
or it was an accident. My intuition is maybe a bit of both. But it's like we say, Darth, people always give up after 3. Maybe I called the show that for a reason. Maybe 3s are important. Yeah. I shan't say any more because I'll give away the game, but yeah, it is interesting. So, okay, we should talk about the ending of the episode, and then I want to tell you about the internet's reaction to this whole situation. So, since Sherlock vowed to protect Mary, this death puts a huge rift between him and Watson. Sherlock visits John's therapist, but he's reluctant to talk about it. Back at Baker Street, Sherlock and Mrs. Hudson kind of lament the loss. Sherlock opens a parcel containing a DVD titled Miss Me, with a posthumous message from Mary telling him to save John Watson. Sherlock goes to visit John, and Molly comes out and is like, hey, he doesn't want to see you. Returning to the story of the merchant, Sherlock concludes that death is inevitable, but questions if how one dies is also certain and unchangeable. In a post-credit sequence, additional footage from Mary's DVD shows her scathing Sherlock, telling him to go to hell. One thing I did note is that exchange between Sherlock and Molly is brutal to watch. Like, you can tell that she's having trouble with it. The acting there is brilliant. It's so good. I think it's really starting to. I've written down here, the show is really starting to zero in on how some of these characters relate to each other and the complexities of that.
It only took 3 seasons.
Jesus Christ, 4 seasons, Darth. 3 seasons and a special. But what an underplayed little exchange that is, where you can tell that Molly is heartbroken about it, and she's heartbroken for John, and she's heartbroken for Sherlock, and she's in the middle of this situation, and it's so good. It's so well done.
It's interesting that we never actually see him read the note, I don't think, unless it happens next episode and I've forgotten.
The note?
She hands it, John doesn't want to talk to him, but he wrote a note and she hands it to him and says something like, you don't have to read it in front of me, it's pretty rough, or something like that.
I think he does read it next episode.
Does he? Okay.
Yeah, or at least he does in between episodes, because that's part of the reason why the thing that happens in the next episode happens.
Okay.
That's the impetus for Sherlock going off the rails, I guess. I believe.
What else in here? The reveal at the therapist, I loved. Maybe it was obvious, but you have this long shot as the camera kind of dollies back, looking at the therapist as she's talking. You assume she's talking to John like she's always been, and then it ends up being Sherlock. I love the way that they did that. I just thought it was a neat little shot, a neat little play, that he knew he needed therapy, but he didn't know how to talk to a therapist. Just multiple levels.
Yeah, doesn't know how to have emotions, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this episode turned out to have nothing to do with Moriarty, at all. Is the other thing I've written down here, which I just think is an interesting choice. It's not what I would have done, but I get what they're going for and where it's going to pay off later. But I think this episode for me stifles what's interesting about itself in order to set stuff up for later, or kind of just does things to get us to the scene they need, a scene they need to execute. It feels very the word we used at the start was contrived. It feels contrived and lazy in a way that's sort of indicative of, I guess, what the season is, where this whole season is kind of constructed around a conclusion, instead of being individual stories that build to a conclusion.
And we didn't even...
They're very, very different things.
We didn't even talk about everything. There's so much more bad that we didn't talk about. The whole scene with the bloodhound running around town as they're trying to track the little bit of blood that was on the piece of pottery. just anesthetized me, man. That shit was so boring. I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah, that scene sucks. I didn't mind the hacker that he knew. I thought that was like a fine addition.
Yeah, and I love
But yeah.
I love the fact that like they have the little bit of dialogue when Mary was at the hacker's house for some reason, and then John says, "We're not supposed to bring the baby out on missions," and she goes, "I know, of course. That's why I brought him. That's why I brought her. And you're going to take her away." And then John's like, "No, I'm not leaving. We're taking the kid with us." And so
Yeah.
they run around with the baby.
With the kid and the dog. It's a lot. Yeah.
Like, you just said you're not supposed to do this.
Yeah, I don't. Man, there's so much in this fucking episode. The Sherlock just makes fun of that guy for like cross-dressing, which is like cool and awesome and not transphobic at all. There's that. There's just a bunch of stuff in this which sucks.
I'm still
Yeah.
That is one of like there are multiple solves. Actually, this one episode might break the record for the most solves that we ever see, but we only see the tail end of like 8 of them. Because like the entire time he's just rapidly solving everything just because he's bored, I guess, and he's killing time until Moriarty shows up. But this one just has me fascinated because unless this dude is like actively wearing a bra in this scene, how in the world could Sherlock ever have figured that out?
I also just write a different joke. I don't know. Like, it's just fucking lazy. I don't know. Yeah. But it's bad. Don't do shit like this, guys. You can do other jokes. It's fine. Okay, so I want to talk to you about, I guess, like the way that the internet reacted to this episode and what the kind of theory crafting was happening behind the scenes. So one thing that's really important to understand is that Sherlock is massive at this point. When this episode comes out, which is January 2017, this is the highest peak of the keyword Sherlock in Google ever, like in the entirety of history.
Wow.
The show is massive at this point.
Now, did that correspond to any of the RDJ movies?
No. Huh. So this beat them. January 2017 is when these 3 episodes come out in kind of fortnights, I believe, and it's the biggest spike on the internet. Whether it was as popular or not, certainly the internet talked about it the most in 2017 because this is the peak of the Tumblr community for this show. So I want to just kind of step you through, I guess, the 2 ways that people reacted to this. The first one is pretty indicative, I think, of most users. This is from Final Problem, a Tumblr user. They wrote like a 2,000-word explanation of the logistics of why Mary's death was fake. And so, like, why she didn't really die. I don't want to labor on the specific details. I'll just give you kind of like a few high-level points to give you an idea of what's happening historically. So, quote, some fans see the bullet jump as a sign that nothing about this scene was real. Which is okay, that's totally your call to make, but this isn't really the theory post for you. Because personally, my take is that if the whole thing was going to be revealed as imaginary, they wouldn't have bothered building all the pieces they needed for a faked death explanation. I don't begrudge them a little TV showmanship here, especially since it's far from the first time it's happened in the show, so I'm used to it by now. There's also something to be said for needing the flying leap to establish that this was an intentional choice Mary made. And the way that fits the internal story logic, even if it doesn't really fit real logic. Quote. So, basically, this is someone who... So there's 2 theories about what happened. Either this was entirely an imaginary sequence that didn't really happen, or that Mary faked her own death and isn't dead. And so this is an interesting post because this person is arguing against the idea that it's imaginary in order to argue why her death was faked. So like arguing against something that isn't in the text for something else that isn't in the text, which is kind of like what the community has become. The thrust of this theory is that Mary was wearing a bulletproof vest and used chemicals to like fake, her heart stopping and things like that. So they go on to say, quote, since his last vow, they've been setting up the idea that bad people were after Mary and that's why she needed to stay hidden in her normal life. Then in the 6 Thatchers, bad people did try to kill Mary, but here's the catch. Those people were AJ, whom Mary previously believed to be dead, and Vivian, who no one saw as more than a secretary. AJ and Vivian weren't the baddies Mary was hiding from. There's still someone else out there who wants her dead. And what if that person was getting a little too close? Quote. So the idea is like, actually she's faking her death because there's some other bigger bad out there that's coming to get her. Which is kind of ludicrous. But that idea of arguing against a theory and developing a different theory in response to it is kind of, that's what the Tumblr side of this has become, in a really interesting way. I mean, for me, like, obviously the death isn't fake. Like, that really would undercut like what the show is going for. But that's interesting that people are reading it like this. I think it's natural. It's like I was saying before. We've seen people survive gunshots. We've seen people survive jumping off buildings. Like, it's not unreasonable for the fan base to be thinking this way. I guess it is unreasonable, but what I mean is like it's not outlandish for them to be assuming things like this. The text has enough there. How do you feel about, I guess, the possibility that a death might have been faked?
I do not think that it makes sense given the context of what we saw in the episode, because if she were ever going to fake her death, it would have been when she went on the run and was traveling all over the world. Instead of doing that, had she faked her death adequately enough and had Molly fake a body in the morgue for AJ to go see, then that could have solved everything. But there is no reason for her to fake her death at that point, because she has never... Like, the idea of a bigger bad coming after her isn't necessarily, that could happen. But, like, they were always wearing masks. They seemed to have their identities really well concealed except from each other. So I had always got the impression that it was more like, I have done bad things, so bad things will come after me. More of like a... feng shui is not the right word, but I'm not thinking of the right word. Karma.
What? Karma. Oh,
yeah. Those are
Feng
totally
shui.
the same thing.
Yeah, very interchangeable, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so that's kind of how I had always taken it, is when she was saying that stuff was going to happen, it was because karma was going to eventually catch up to her, So faking her death at that point when there is no one that she knows coming after her, it's like you can't fake your death to get away from karma. So...
it's like the fact that this theory has to invent a bigger bad that we don't know about, it should be pretty telling. Like... yeah. And this is the thing that's starting to happen, is people are like... The show is bad enough at this point that people are having to start to like... I think previously in the previous seasons, they were building off stuff that was in the text and deliberately misinterpreting it. Now they're inventing completely new details to make these theories work, because the show has deteriorated to a point where like it lacks enough logic and internal consistency that you have to add information to make the text make sense. Which is really fascinating.
And ironic.
It's not really been... Yeah.
It's ironic because that's like exactly what I'm talking about in this video that I'm editing on Thor right now. And I'm trying to like nail down the difference in the Thor from Thor 1 and 2 and then Avengers 1 and 2. And then starting with Ragnarok, it's a completely different version of the character. And I keep seeing like fans that are trying to defend him changing because it makes sense that he's been hanging around humans and thus he would naturally change, but the text doesn't actually show that. You just have to infer it, and they have to make up this whole backstory of how he was changing, much like these people are trying to, put all of this extra inferences throughout here just to make something make sense when it doesn't. It was written badly, and they don't want to admit it.
It's just bad. Like, here's the thing. The third Thor film is deeply entertaining, and it's a really interesting character that they present. But it's not the same character as what they had previously. And that's just an interesting thing that you have to acknowledge and be like, yeah, Taika Waititi completely rewrote that character, and because it wasn't working before. Or they wanted to do a different style of thing. Like, acknowledging that does not necessarily harm the fact that, like, Like, you can say, like, oh yeah, that what we were doing previously wasn't working, so we changed it up. But you can't then, like, you then have to invent paratext to stitch it all together instead of showing us that change in a film or in text. I don't think any of this at the time in the Sherlock context is helped by the way that the creators are talking about the show. I want to play this clip really quickly because I think it's fascinating. It's very, very brief, but this is Moffat and Sue Vert talking about trying to keep things they're doing on the show secret. And this is kind of the way that they talk about the show in general, which I just think is really fascinating.
So did Bad Robot produce this series? Is that
I don't know why.
like I don't know if you're in on that joke or not, but like everything that JJ's company Bad Robot has produced has leaked beforehand, especially the Star Wars stuff. Like the entire scripts leak well before, like in such early stages, and then you go into like Ryan's shoot, and like so little leaked out compared to when Bad Robot is in charge, and it became like it became like a meme in the Star Wars community that you're going to find out what's happening if JJ is in charge, because they have no structure and no control about what's going on. That's why I laughed.
Always coming out.
Yeah, that's why I laughed so much when she was like, "We're literally losing scripts," and I'm like,
it's real loose over there with BBC. But the way that they talk about this stuff, I think it's really interesting. That's a really small slice, but what they're doing inadvertently is that whenever they talk about these secrets, or they talk about the show as having all of these twists in it, they're kind of like adding to the malaise that is, like, they're basically helping the internet justify the theory crafting. Because they keep saying, oh, these secrets, or this rug pull, or we've got this really exciting twist coming up. And so the internet keeps trying to guess the twist, and they keep building on top of that information they're hearing from the creators. When we get to the end of the season and we have our final episode talking about the Appletree Yard theorized fourth episode, there's a lot of metatextual evidence from the creators that there's something going on here that we don't know about. And they're saying it the entirety of this season. And what they mean is the reveal of the third character. But what it comes across as is, this is going to blow your mind. Like they are stoking to this fire of we have a twist that's so big that you won't see it coming. And then you get to that final episode, and it's not really a very big twist, and it's also not very good. And so you're putting your fans in a position where you're basically giving them permission to do this theory crafting. And then when they're disappointed by the way it ends, you kind of have to admit, we just did we tried to make a good show and failed. And this is where I think some of the historical way Tumblr is reacting to the show becomes a thing that the creators are using as a marketing technique, where they are putting fuel to the fire of there is big twists coming, that there's going to be a big rug pull, which keeps the discourse going online, which keeps people watching the show. And so they're sort of using that, I guess, in a commercial sense, it seems like.
Yeah. I just had the weirdest realization that I don't know at what point in our society, as far as entertainment goes, that there was such a hard switch from watching a show because that episode was going to be entertaining and you knew the next episode was going to be entertaining, versus you want to watch a show because there's a mystery that you don't understand and you're hoping to figure out. growing up watching like Batman the animated series, it's like I wasn't trying to figure out a mystery. I was like, I want to watch this episode. It's going to be cool. It's going to have awesome stuff. It's going to
Yeah.
be intriguing and well written. But then you get into modern TV shows, and you have like Westworld, and it's like the episode will end, and you're like, I don't understand half of what I just saw. I have to watch next week to get this, to have this bug gone, so I'll understand what I watched last time.
Mm.
But then this episode, I won't understand what I saw, so I'll have to watch the next one. And it's like the way that they build shows now is confusing, because they're like messing with our psychology, where they're forcing us to watch the next one to understand what we saw previously. And then in the midst of that, we're getting online and writing all these theories about what might be happening. So they're forcing a level of engagement that has never happened in the past, because we never needed it. It was just every show was more episodic and self-contained. And I don't know, it'd be really interesting to kind of track like when that started happening, and if there was like a prime instigator.
I can tell you, because I've done this research before. So it was The Sopranos. That was the first kind of prestige television program that changed. It focused on the serialization, and then you get things like Breaking Bad and Mad Men that come right off the heels of that, and become the biggest shows on television. But it's Lost. Lost is the show that puts the gun to the head of the television industry and says, watch next episode to find out what happens and what all this means. And you get to the end of that episode and it goes, watch next time to find out what it all means. And so there is a real way in which you can trace back the justification of this method of storytelling, which is serialization. There's a way you can trace that back to The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and Mad Men. And there's a way that you can trace back what exactly it is you're describing, which is the Moffat style of tune in next week to work out what it all meant. That's an Abrams maneuver. And so the combination of those is something that you look at the way that the Marvel entertainment machine functions. It is definitionally the grandchild of that era, where everything ties together. What's the big story? What's the big plot happening? And certainly, yeah, Lost is attributable to the hey, tune in next time to find out. But then, it is, to an extent, it's things like, yeah, Mad Men, which was very serialized. Mad Men didn't do that. Mad Men was just like a very like serialized subtextual show. Certainly The Sopranos. And then you get this tendency, kind of explode as a result of the Marvel kind of vehicle. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think we talked about it a little bit in season 1. In no small part, Sherlock and Doctor Who also become a little bit responsible for this becoming sort of non-prestige, coming into non-prestige television, where that, like I was saying before, that silence mystery percolates through like 3 seasons of Doctor Who. Sherlock has this big rug pull that they keep promising. And so what you're seeing is like these prestige television programs that are serialized, the combination of Lost to doing the promise of the big reveal. And then you have these different writers taking up these different elements of that and trying to wield it for different outcomes. And in the same way that the ending of Lost just kind of like is bad, this kind of like doesn't really pay off in a particular way. It's really, really hard to do well. And so that's why when you see it executed well, like, you have the think about the Infinity War stuff with Marvel, whatever your mileage may vary on the Endgame stuff, but the way that Infinity War executes on the build-up of the stuff that came before it is a tremendous achievement. Comics have been doing it for decades, and it's interesting that it took Lost and these other prestige television programs to bring it into the mainstream of television and film as well.
One interesting comparison that I would make between those examples, though, is that like some of what I was describing is you have to watch next episode to understand what you saw in the last episode. But with so much Marvel stuff, you are trying to like contextualize the future episode. Like you understood everything that happened in today's episode, but there were hints in there for what will come next time or what might come 5 movies from now. So it's such a different method where you get all the pieces, but you get future puzzle pieces too, versus not having all of the puzzle pieces and you have to watch the next episode to get those puzzle pieces to go back and fill them in. So I don't know. It's just that method of missing story versus having added story that will show you the future.
But I think the latter is an evolution of the former.
Yeah.
Like you go from reaction as the core mechanic to then speculation as the core mechanic for engagement.
Yeah, and I should think that the Marvel way is generally the far superior one, because I don't think that you should almost ever have a story that is incomplete on its own. Like, maybe if it's like the middle episode of a series, then you could say it's okay for that one episode to really confuse the audience. It'll make sense at the end of the next episode, or especially if it's like a 2-parter episode, then yeah, that makes total sense. But to have something that you have to, especially Lost, like I didn't watch enough, but there was enough that I was hearing about where like you literally don't understand what's happening, and that's just like bad writing. And it's funny, when I started this entire topic, I was about to say I think J.J. Abrams is to blame. So when you said that, I was like, score.
He's definitely a huge contributor. Yeah. I want to give you this bit of context because I think this is really interesting as well. So this is to Sussex Bond, which is a Tumblr. So someone asks an anonymous question to this user. For those who vaguely recall, so on Tumblr, you can basically, when you send a question to somebody's blog, you can either do it with your account or you can do it anonymously. So this one comes from Sussex Bond in 2016. So this is just after the previous episode airs. Quote, "I'm afraid for John in the new series, especially since it seemed like what happened in TST will be his fault, and Martin said his moral compass will go off pole a bit. And he's going to be dealing with temptation and guilt, whatever that means. I'm afraid they'll ruin John Watson, and he doesn't deserve that. I want them to do him justice. He's been done wrong in so many adaptations. This is vague for a prompt, but it's more of just a message. Yeah, I'm afraid they'll ruin John." Quote. Sussex Bond replies with, quote, "Yeah, I totally get this fear. I think it depends on how you see John as a character. And people seem really divided on their interpretations there, and everyone seems equally emotionally invested. There are a lot of people who still hate Season 3 John because they see him as wildly out of character. I don't. I know a lot of people do. So I think that if people are married to the idea of a John who is primarily or only a kind-hearted, loyal carer, they're going to be in for a big shock and or disappointment. I see John as very human and very flawed, a man with a warm heart and a desperate need to love and be loved, but also battles with anger, fear, and codependence. He has all the characteristics with someone who grew up being abused and who hasn't dealt with the fallout of that, except to try and run from it or stick his head in the sand. What's a good man who tries to do what he thinks... he's a good man who tries to do what he thinks he is expected to do, but you know what? That's not sustainable. Sherlock knows this. He's told John that John is at his core... He's told John that John is not at his core the man he's trying desperately to be. And no matter how much he fights his true self, it will always push through. So I think we are going to see the ramifications of that in this season. Sherlock isn't the only one for whom ghosts have come home to roost. John has been running from his true self for a very long time too, and he's going to face the natural consequences of his choices in Season 3. For me, there is very little they could do that would ruin John. It would have to be something wildly out of character. If they made him a bumbling idiot, for instance, that would bug me because they've often stated they're trying to make a point of having John not be that old stereotype. This is sort of why I don't like the theory that John will suspect Sherlock is the father of his baby. I just don't see John as being that stupid. I'll talk about that theory in a second. Or if they made him evil to the level of Moriarty, which I guarantee you they won't do. John cheating on his wife, or being involved in secrets behind Sherlock's back, or even a dark secret from his war days, all those would seem in character to me. He's human, he's morally flawed, mostly because he's not dealing with his own shit, but there is definitely a struggle there. So I'm not going to panic. I'm going to give this season a chance. We know from promo and setlock that whatever happens between Sherlock and John gets resolved in some way because they are talking to each other right away in the next episode, even if things may be strained. So I don't think it's irrevocable damage done, though the changes will cause their relationship. Though the changes that may cause their relationship may be irrevocable. But at this point, that might be a good thing. They weren't at the best place at the end of season 3. End quote. So, okay. What I love about this post is, now, to your knowledge, have you ever heard the theory that the kid is Sherlock's? Because the look on your face, man.
I mean, I got a good laugh out of it. I don't know why anyone would come up with that theory, or how they could defend it, or what kind of medication they might be on. But no, now if we are talking about like John got in a relationship with a woman, and Sherlock had always just said that he had platonic feelings for the woman, I could easily see that argument being made for her, but it ain't her. So,
yep, agreed. It's a really fascinating artifact of just the amount of theories people are outputting.
It's kind of interesting. I'm trying to remember in the past multiple episodes we've done if there have been any of the gay theories, because they were flying left and right when we first started this. But they've been getting less and less the longer it's gone. I guess since Mary got introduced.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, I talked about it in episode 3 of last season. But because the previous episode isn't really in the real world, and because this one is really about Mary, it doesn't really come up. It's still in the back burner. It's going to become very prominent as we close out the show. But it seems like what people have done is they're kind of like waiting to see what happens with the outcome of this episode. And then we're going to get the resurgence of it with the conclusion of the show where people are pissed off. Where they're like, why did you settle this stuff up if you did nothing with it? At this point, people are still hopeful, so they're not overcrafting that theory. They still think this show is going to be good.
Like, I'm surprised that no one has brought it up, like, based off however accurate it may have been, but based off my reading of Vivian shooting and saying that Sherlock egged her on into shooting as a way of defending Mary. But you could also read that as Sherlock knew Mary would jump in front of the bullet to save him, so that was Sherlock's way of getting Mary killed so he could have John all to himself.
That's literally part of the John Locke theory. That is part of the endgame theory, is that Sherlock deliberately put pieces in place so that Mary would die. So you've hit the nail on the head with that one. That just doesn't become evident until, episode 3, basically, of this season, is what I would say. But that kind of thinking is exactly what we're going to get to. So when we talk about John Locke, which we will a lot in episode 3 and then our finale as well, something to keep in mind is whenever you have those thoughts of like, oh, you could twist this to be a way in which, Sherlock and John will get together. If you can possibly twist it, someone is doing it. It's just not the current... At the start of season 4, it's just not the current leading thing that people are theory crafting about. People are still trying to, justify or make the show good and interesting. They're not yet at the point where they're trying to fix or fix is the wrong word. They're currently trying to fix the show and make it good and interesting. They are not yet at the point where they're going to completely retrofit the entire series. They're still doing pieces that are building up to larger theories. That comes in a few weeks of our time and the next 2 episodes, which is primarily going to be my focus, is like the 2 leading theories, which is, the John Locke endgame, and then a kind of smattering of like Moriarty coming back and Sherlock and Moriarty getting together, and among a few other bits and pieces. So
and this is really going to be interesting as we get into this, because, and I'm only just now realizing this, that I must, on some level, I must have known that these were bad episodes, because the further we go, the less I know them. Like, I know the first couple seasons really well. I did not remember how this episode went down until I watched it again, and I can barely remember how the last episode goes down. And this next episode, I only barely remember what the plot was. Only barely.
It's not a great sign, is it?
Yeah.
I remember this next episode because it's visually the best in the series, and then I remember the finale because of the consequence, but not because of the content of the episode. Like, it's not because the stories are good. It's because of what happened historically, for me.
I remember the last one as being extremely confusing visually. Much like you mentioned earlier with flashbacks and how they'll just throw a flashback in and it'll be confusing. But the last episode, they jump you from location to location in a way that's pretty disorienting. I look forward to it.
And also with time and flashbacks, it gets very... Next episode is great because it's deliberately confusing and it works for that reason. But yeah, certainly the final episode of the season is just... Yeah. But yeah, that's the next episode. We'll be talking about The Lying Detective, which is season 4, episode 2. As I said, it's my favorite episode visually. I think it's the most creatively filmed thing I've seen in a long time. It's a shame about the plot. Just gotta get my digs in before we wrap up. Yeah, we'll be talking a lot more about the John Locke theories as they ramp up toward the finale. We're getting kind of very close to the end of the show here. I suspect these are going to be really long episodes as we get to kind of the end. And then obviously we have our finale planned where we're going to talk about the proposed secret 4th Sherlock episode and what all that means. And I guess, you know, our general thoughts on the series, on its place in history, and maybe sort of what we can learn as people that talk about story and write story from this whole project that we've undertaken. And then we'll read some excerpts from the nonfiction book that I'm publishing based on all this research. So you can look forward to all of that. Darth, given that time travel happens and this is going to come out in like 3 months, do you have anything you want to plug?
What am I planning on like 2 projects from now? At that point, hopefully I will finally be done with my Kylo Ren analysis. I've got one on Finn, I've got one on Rey. And I've got a good bit done on the Kylo Ren one, which you've been gracious enough to give me notes on that I will positively review at some point. I promise. It was like 2 months ago you sent those to me.
Look, this episode won't be out till January, so you got time. All right, you got plenty of time. Actually, maybe it'll be out earlier. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe like December. God, could you imagine if the final episode of this comes out on Christmas Day? It might. I'm looking at the calendar. It might be. Yeah, we'll see how we go. YouTube.com. If you just type in Darth''D, you'll find all of Darth's stuff. We do different things over there. I'm sure at some point you, me, and Rye will talk about Andor, the Star Wars thing.
Yeah, I gotta start watching that.
Same. I've downloaded it all, but I haven't even cracked it open yet.
Yeah.
I gotta get through the Lord of the Rings show first.
I haven't started that either. I feel like a really bad nerd right now.
I've been busy watching fucking Sherlock.
This is your fault. You wanted to do this.
You said it was. You were like, no, actually, I like Sherlock. It's a good show. That's what you said that to me. You were like, you know, you can't ruin it. I promise this. Yeah, how do you fucking mind?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have the video clip of where this all started too. I gotta find that again.
That's yeah. I believe I said something like, "Don't worry, I can ruin anything." Which, I mean, this show ruins itself. It doesn't need my help. I should say too, I got an email from somebody who was they just finished season 3, episode 1. So they'll hear this 4 months after they sent that email. But they sort of kind of provided some corrections on some specific details that we had gotten wrong about the plot of the episode. And they were like, "Hey, really like the show, but you know, you guys got these things wrong." I was reflecting on it, and I think part of the project of this, part of the project of this show is, if we're getting details about the plot of the episodes wrong, that speaks to the project that we're undertaking. Like, I'm doing like 20 to 30 hours of research per episode. If we're getting basic details of the story wrong, that means the story is not doing something right. Like that should communicate, I guess, because we're not normal viewers, right? We're not just sitting there laid back. We're deeply interrogating these texts, and if there are details that don't stick, like it's not like you know, I've been doing this Walking Dead video for like the last 2 years, and I'm up to like I'm about halfway through. I'm up to like season 6, and I could tell you pretty much beat for beat what happens season to season of that show in pretty vivid detail, because it's very, very clear. The stories work really well, probably up until about season 7 or 8. But Sherlock, even by season 3, we were like forgetting stuff or being like, I don't know, what happens here. We had to check the tape this episode. Like, that should be really indicative of, even in this project where we're paying attention to like hyper specific details. It's not a good thing, or it should be telling that there are plot details we can't recall or that we have to check. That should reflect, I guess, and that's part of this exercise of this project. Text like this. What have you done?
Oh, here's my microphone.
I'm
just gonna hold it. I'm gonna hold it like this.
Perfect. That's great. That's perfect for the outro. That happened real quickly, huh?
Yeah, it was hanging on by a thread.
Jesus Christ! Now you're doing like a stand up or something. You're doing your type 5 at the comedy improv.
I wanted to say the one interesting thing that came out of that whole talk was that with saying that we are missing facts or misinterpreting facts or whatever, and with you doing the 30 hours of research with every episode, like at least once in every recording that we've done, when we've been talking about a scene, at least once you've said, "Oh, that's amazing. I didn't interpret it that way. You read it a completely different way from me." And you're saying that as someone who has 30 hours invested in that specific episode of looking at that specific episode. Like, I do not think that we could go look at a single episode of Community, spend 30 hours analyzing it, and then both come up with different interpretations of the scene. I mean, it's possible. Yep. It's possible.
It's unlikely.
Yeah. So the fact that we can come up with something different, and then a third person or multiple people online will say, "Hey, you read this wrong," is just indicative of poor, ambiguous storytelling.
Mm-hmm. I think the exception might be like the gas leak era on Community, because there are a few episodes in that. But like, absent that, yeah, you're 100% right. Like, it's telling the lack of control and specificity in this show that's possible.
And I don't remember the gas leak year, so
neither. The fact that there are so many communities on Tumblr at the time, all generating different theories as to what happens, should be pretty telling about what's going on. And that's the whole project of this, right? Like, I want to find out, what is it about this media object that leads to that outcome? And I think we're zeroing in on the answer, which is like a lack of control, a lack of specificity, and then insisting that it is a clever, tightly wound, it's going to be a rug pull, like everything's connected, like insisting on that while doing the opposite and the execution never quite being there. Like, that's the exercise of this experiment that I want to get to, is like, when we go through the theories about that final secret episode, what is it about this media object that led to that as a conclusion that some people had? Because that, to me, I'm obsessed with Moffat's career. Like, it is just so fascinating to me, this kind of projects he works on and the outcomes, right? Maybe one day I'll force you to watch The Time Traveler's Wife and Dracula. Maybe we'll watch his new show. I don't know. Maybe we'll watch all of his episodes of Doctor Who. Who knows? But I think for whatever reason, something about the style of the way that this guy writes scripts and the execution of this show changed the way the internet looked at television. Like, this changes history and media analysis in a big way. And so to me, it's really interesting to work it through. And even to this day, like you say, you know, we have different interpretations of particular scenes. And that's really compelling and interesting to me. So all to say, it is really, if we get details wrong, that is inevitable. And I think probably speaks to the text and what it's trying to do and where it pays its attention. And also probably speaks to where we are paying attention and focus, which is our interpretation of the text, the historical context. We're not sitting here fact-checking each scene to make sure that, you know, oh, I said that this happened before that. Well, that's actually wrong. Like, we're not cinema-sensing ourselves, right? Like, that's not the exercise here.
That might be a fun exercise, though. Is go back and fact check ourselves.
Oh my god, yeah. I try and do fact checking, but it's hard. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode. I just thought I'd address that. I thought it was a really interesting email. Thanks so much for watching or listening. If you want to support us, you can head to patreon.com/zeroindent, where you can get the entirety of this season right now. You could be listening to next episode as soon as you hear this, which is exciting. We're coming up to the end of the show. We're getting to the pointy end of things. Really appreciate your support. Wherever you consume this, consider giving it a comment or a rating. It really does help. It'll help us afford to buy Darth a new microphone stand, which he clearly sorely needs. We'll catch you guys next episode for Season 4, Episode 2, The Lying Detective. Until then, just take it easy. Try not to think about Sherlock. Maybe skip the episode. You just hear us talk about it. You don't have to punish yourself. I don't know. It's up to you. I'll catch you guys then. I don't have anything clever to end with. I kind of feel like I was spinning my wheels there, and then I should have stopped talking a few minutes ago, but now we're still here.
Yeah, we need some kind of sign off. But then I just started thinking about the end of the episode, and Mary's dead, and now I'm angry again.
The sign off is, yeah, we should really get going, but man, that episode made me mad. I feel like every fucking episode of this goddamn show. Don't be a shark. There you go. That's the takeaway from this episode. We did it. All right, we'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for watching and listening. Goodbye.
We should have done some like witty quote about Samara. We could have written something really fun right there. It was like
we could have, but
yeah, it's like you are doomed to watch the next episode. Like there's nothing you could do to get away from it.
True. Yeah, something like that. Something clever. Maybe I'll think of something in post. I'll overdub it.